Okay, everybody, I'd like to welcome everybody here for the Scrutiny Committee today on the 18th of September. I would like to welcome some new members who will be attending the committee for the first time as we've grown in number to 13. It's the usual housekeeping rules that everybody's familiar with, so I would like to ask if there's any apologies for today's meeting.
As convener, we have a apology received from Councillor Braun, and Councillor Audrey Coates will be substituting.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest for today's meeting?
I feel I should declare a non-financial interest in Horsecross Arts since I sit on the board of Horsecross Arts.
Thank you. Councillor Coates?
A similar non-financial interest.
Russ? Okay, can we agree the minutes of the Scrutiny Committee on the 12th of June? Have you got a question to the...
Yep, yeah, can I just comment positively on the low number of items on today's agenda? 3 papers, I think it's great. I don't think it shows any disrespect to this committee whatsoever, so thank you for that.
Thank you. We did, because of the length of the committee and what was coming up today, we have pushed a couple of items back for the next committee, so thanks for that. Okay, we move on to item number 4, which is an update by the Arm's Length organisation, and it will be Horsecross Arts Limited today. The format for this update today will be that the council officers working with Horsecross Arts will speak first and give an update to where they are. Then I'll ask the chair and Jason if they would like to, if they can give an update, and then we'll save the questions till everybody's finished talking. Then you can address the questions to any of the people who've previously spoken, if everybody's happy with that. Okay.
I'll excuse myself for the time being.
That's perfectly fine, Councillor Coates. Councillor Purvis, are you just wishing to stay?
I think we'd like to listen to the
perfect,
discussion.
That's fine. Great stuff. Okay, so we'll hand over to either Fiona or Scott or Gordon. I'm not sure what he's going under just now, so we'll pass over to them to start off proceedings. Thanks.
Thanks, convener. Just to say by way of introduction, Scott is going to take the committee through the current financial position with Horsecross, and then I'll say some things briefly about various committee members have asked for a bit of analysis to be done on wider issues and aspects of Horsecross's performance, so I'll take you through some of that as well, and then as you've suggested, convener, we can leave questions to the end. Just to say briefly before I hand over to Scott that, as I think everyone is aware, council officers are working on a temporary basis, and I stress it is a temporary basis at the moment, directly with the Horsecross team and the board to move Horsecross to a more sustainable long-term position. I think worth saying, hopefully to reassure committee members, because this question has been asked of myself and Scott in the past, that our job is to advise the board of Horsecross and also councillors and this committee impartially of where we are and what we think needs to happen next to get Horsecross to a more sustainable footing. There is no conflict of interest in respect of what we're doing. Our desire to get Horsecross to a more safe and sustainable place financially exists in our minds as council officers, wherever we're located and wherever we're working. So just to reassure everybody involved of that. Scott, do you want to run through finances?
So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an update on our work to support Horsecross. The purpose of this session is to bring the committee up to speed with the most recent financial developments. Before I begin with the main part of my presentation, I wanted to assure the committee that the Council's Finance Department is applying significant resources to support Horsecross. We bring significant financial management and systems development experience to assist the Horsecross Board. I'm also in contact with the heads of finance from both Culture Perth Kinross and Live Active Leisure, who are also both keen to support us. Most of the financial information in this presentation was prepared by the Interim Head of Finance and was considered by the Horsecross Finance Committee at the end of July and the Board in mid-August. This afternoon I want to bring the committee up to speed with developments since the last Scrutiny Committee briefing in June. I want to provide you with a high-level analysis of the Q1 projected outturns that were prepared by the Interim Head of Finance and considered by the Finance Committee and Board a few weeks ago. I want to give you a reminder of the final outturns over the last few years so that we have a shared understanding of the scale of the challenges ahead. And finally, I want to let you know about some of the developments that we intend to take forward over the short and medium term. So, on the 12th of June, the Interim Head of Finance provided a verbal update to the Scrutiny Committee. In this update, the committee were advised that a balanced break-even budget had been approved by the Board in March. The organisation was moving in the right direction. Cash flow challenges existed but were being managed, and that capacity to take forward transformation was limited. The Interim Head of Finance also identified a number of improvement actions, including forecasting, reporting, budgeting, systems development and commitment accounting. So Ms Roberts and I met with the Horsecross Finance team on the 24th of June, where we discussed the Horsecross cash flow as at the 17th of June 2019. This is a summary of what we discussed. At this point, the detail's not important. However, what is important is the highlighted row. Based on the cash flow presented to us on the 24th of June, it was tight in a number of months, individual months, but at no point was the cash flow negative. At the meeting, it was also confirmed that at no point in any of the individual weeks that made up the cash flow did any of the projections turn negative. On the 22nd of July, the Council was presented with a revised cash flow position. This updated position set out a significant deterioration in the projected cash flow position at the end of August. Between the June and July forecasts, the cash flow positions had deteriorated by around £330,000. A positive position in June of £77,000 had been replaced by negative £250,000 in July. And there were a number of reasons for this movement. Assumptions had been made on Creative Scotland funding, accelerating their funding that had not been finalised or agreed at that point. Show settlements were higher than forecast. There were a number of errors on emissions, and payroll costs were higher than projected. So what was the response to the information received by the Council towards the end of July? We brought forward the scheduled SLA payment, which allowed the salaries to be paid at the end of July. We paid over £130,000 plus VAT of the additional council funding for 2019-20 to allow the Horsecross VAT bill to be paid at the start of August. We approached Creative Scotland to bring forward their scheduled payments, which was quickly agreed and paid. And we continued with the proactive management of expenditure. So if we could now just turn to the projected outturn for the current year. This information was prepared by the former Interim Head of Finance and considered by the Finance Committee at the end of July and the Board in August. The Q1 projections demonstrate a deficit of around £74,000 in 2019-20, which is a deterioration from the position the Scrutiny Committee were advised of in mid-June. And this is made up of a projected deficit of £91,000 from the trading part of the organisation and a £17,000 surplus from the charity side of the business. The Finance Committee were also updated on the cash flow projections and advised that the group balance sheet showed a negative £22,000 position at the end of June. So this sheet was provided to the board, which provides some more analysis of the projected position, and it's in the presentation I issued yesterday. So the projected outturn, which is set out in the last column on the right, was prepared by the former Interim Head of Finance in discussion with budget managers across Horsecross. In summary, direct income is projected to be £20,000 less than budget. Direct expenditure is projected to be £39,000 less than budget. Oh, sorry, keep clicking. Overheads are projected to be £2,000 more than budget, and the trading surplus is projected to be £91,000 less than budget. All of these forecasts result in the overall projected deficit of £74,000 for 2019-20. However, there are a couple of areas which may impact on this position in a positive manner. Firstly, this projection did not recognise any of the £180,000 of additional funding from the Council approved in the 2019-20 revenue budget. And secondly, this forecast did include the cost of a Chief Executive and Head of Finance for the remainder of the year. So both of those factors will hopefully make a positive impact. But undoubtedly, new pressures and savings will emerge and impact both positively and negatively on the projected outturn of the current financial year. Once the six-month actual position is available, revised projections will be prepared for the Horsecross Board, and I would plan on bringing this further update to the next meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. If I could just turn now to the scale of the challenge facing us all. This is a summary of the final outturns and projections over the last 5 years. So you'll see that charitable income has moved from just over £3 million in 2015-16 to over £4 million in 2019-20. However, charitable expenditure has risen from just under £3.4 million to just over £4.4 million. So this has resulted in a recurring deficit on the charity side of the business between £300,000 and £400,000. The trading surplus peaked at £310,000 in 2015-16, dropping to a projected £208,000 in the current financial year. And all of this has resulted in the surpluses or deficits which are set out in the second last row and impacted on the unrestricted reserves which are set out in the bottom row. Finally, I just wanted to set out some of our short and medium-term goals. There are formal meetings of all finance colleagues from Horsecross and the Council taking place on a weekly basis. As a finance group, Horsecross and Council colleagues have been developing a joint work plan that includes system improvements and maximisation of automation, as well as looking at reporting requirements. As a matter of priority, we are implementing and rolling out commitment accounting across Horsecross. We are undertaking a forensic examination of all income sources and expenditure headings to develop a detailed and sustainable budget for Horsecross into the future. One of the reasons for the large swings in the cash flow I mentioned earlier has been poor forecasting, so we need to get better at preparing management information that can be used to make informed, high-quality decisions. And finally, we continue to monitor the cash flow position to ensure that the organisation can continue to trade. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Scott.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Can you all hear me, councillors? Good. Just picking up on where Scott's left off there, I'm going to talk to you more widely about the work that we've got underway with Horsecross team and board. Those bullet points that you've got up on the slide there are the 3 objectives that I and my team have set for Horsecross in terms of what we need to achieve in this short-term period before we move to a longer-term way of working for Horsecross, which is going to keep it sustainable. And hopefully nobody would disagree with what's up there. That first bullet point, I'm going to say a little bit more about programming and the approach to programme in a moment, because the programme that Horsecross presents in both the theatre but also the concert hall is obviously key to the success of the organisation, both in terms of what is on offer to audiences, but also how the organisation goes about making decisions about how to programme, how it delivers those programmes, and how it monitors and controls expenditure as well as income on programmes. Just a little bit more detail than Scott's given you on, I'm going to talk first about the commercial activities. Because Horsecross is a charity, at the risk of stating the obvious, its commercial activities can't outweigh what it does as a charity, otherwise it's not a charity anymore. But nonetheless, what it does commercially and the income that it raises commercially is absolutely crucial for the well-being of the organisation, because the more mainstream programmes that it presents, the money that it raises from conferences and events, the money that it takes in its bars and cafes, all of that helps to cross-subsidise the programmes, particularly in Perth Theatre, which may not necessarily generate income. And you can see there, this is, I think, just to underline Scott's point, it's one of the key things that we need to address in Horsecross is the ability for it and its teams to accurately forecast expenditure and income. Now, that's not a perfect science, I'm sure Scott would agree, and arts organisations have, you know, significant things that they do where it is quite difficult to accurately predict both income and expenditure. Nonetheless, there are areas of its business where it can do that. And what Scott's team is doing is getting the systems in place to assist Horsecross staff with making sure that they've got a tighter control and oversight of what the organisation is spending and also what it's earning in terms of income. So that top figure there on the slide is based on what Horsecross has actually spent and actually raised up until the end of July, and what it is currently forecasting it will spend and raise by the end of this financial year. But as Scott says, there are a number of shifts and changes that we can expect to that. And you can see there what the projected net profit is for these commercial activities. And a lot of work going on with my team and the catering, conferencing and events teams to look at the profitability of these aspects of the business. Are there ways of doing things more efficiently? Are there things that Horsecross already does really well that it could do more of, etc. I'm going to talk now about the programme, and not every aspect of the programme, but I've got 3 slides here, really all of them focusing on 3 key parts of the artistic programme that Horsecross presents. So the first is drama, which obviously takes place in the theatre. Then we're going to look at music, both classical music, which Horsecross has a really fantastic reputation for nationally. And finally, we're going to look at what's called, I think, music, open brackets, other, close bracket, which is contemporary music, but also quite a lot of the concerts that are promoted. They're not directly presented by Horsecross. They're tours or promotions that come to Perth and may visit several other venues in the UK or Scotland. And you can see there what I'm showing here with thanks to council officers and Horsecross officers who've pulled this data together. At the bottom of the slide, you can see the total sales for drama in terms of what potentially could have been sold. So that's the capacity. The target which the organisation set for itself. This is the period April, so the start of this financial year up until the end of August, and what it has actually sold in terms of tickets. Drama is probably one of the smallest areas of programme in terms of what it generates in income, but in terms of Horsecross's reputation for quality, presenting brilliant work, it's a really important strand of what the organisation delivers. And of course, we've got this fantastic new theatre in which to deliver it. So it is never going to be an area that will generate huge ticket sales for the organisation, but it is really important that there's the same scrutiny of costs, income, quality, all of those things. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. Music, same thing there. You can see in the graph at the bottom, target up to this point this year about 363,000 and pretty good performance. So this is music other, so it's contemporary music, things like the Monday night thing, which ran in the Joan Knight studio on a Monday night, small local bands, talent, and also the big promoted acts, Ocean Colour Scene, these big bands that will visit Perth, as well as various other venues in Scotland. And this strand of programme is really important for the organisation's health in terms of its financial sustainability. Big audiences, attracts a lot of people, primarily local, and I'll say more about audiences shortly as well. And finally, classical, again, like drama, not a huge revenue earner for Horsecross, but as you can see again at the bottom there, the target up until this point this year, around 146,000, ticket sales around 126,000. So in total, just looking at these 3 strands of programme, the target so far this year is around what Horsecross, ideally, if it had sold every single ticket in terms of every single seat available in either the concert hall or the theatre. Potentially it could have generated around £650,000 worth of ticket income. So far it's generated around 530,000. There's a couple of caveats to what I'm saying. Generally the way that theatres and organisations like Horsecross programme is they will not assume 100% capacity. Obviously they won't assume that every single seat in every single house will be sold, and that is calculated on the basis of how popular the show is likely to be, how well has similar programme performed in the venue in the past, etc., etc. So it does vary depending on the particular show that's being presented. But this information, and this is one of the things we've been talking to the Horsecross team and the programmers, is absolute gold dust. It's crucial for the organisation to understand how it is currently performing, how it's using evidence and data about its audiences to make programming decisions and decide from an artistic point of view what is most important to it, what it wants to invest in, what are the benefits and what are the risks. And just sticking on that for a moment, these figures are actually from 2017-18. They're not the most up-to-date figures, but they're a bit of an illustration. Again, I've shared these with the Horsecross board and with Mr. Ellis, and I've also talked to Horsecross programme staff about this information. So this was actually provided when we did the review of cultural trusts last year by the then interim chief executive of Horsecross. And you can see there that there's quite a high level of programme cost, and Scott mentioned in his presentation that whilst the income, overall income, including grant income to Horsecross, has risen in the last couple of years, expenditure on programming has also risen. So staff costs, for example, have gone up by around 12%. Now, some of that is entirely understandable. We've reopened a new building, etc. Other aspects of expenditure we need to do a little bit more work on to understand why those costs have risen. A couple of things just to note in terms of understanding audiences and who audiences are, and as councillors, you know, you will be getting this feed, you will be visiting, I know that many of you do visit the theatre and the concert hall, you will be talking to your own constituents about what's presented in the theatre and the concert hall. And worth noticing there, and again I've talked about this with the programming team in Horsecross quite a bit, you can see there that most of the tickets that are purchased, this doesn't necessarily mean the people who come on the night, but most of the tickets which are purchased are sold to people who are living very locally. And equally, when you look at repeat attendance, most of the total attendances, so people wherever they're coming from, whether they live in Perth and Kinross or whether they're coming from further afield, are only coming to Horsecross once, or certainly only came to Horsecross once in this particular year that we're looking at. And so huge potential I've suggested to the programme team to think about how that they increase that 30% who are coming twice or more and make that a bigger number. The other thing just to mention before moving on is in terms of the children and family programmes, I haven't put the number up on the slide, but the income that is earned from children and families programmes, that's everything from Little Stars, the Perth Youth Theatre activities, the pantomime, the many children's shows, children drama that we put on at Horsecross, or Horsecross puts on. That's actually a significant revenue earner for the organisation. I think last year it earned around £230,000. And so one of my questions to the programme team has been, given that that's such an important audience, and obviously the youngsters who are coming to the theatre and the concert hall now, ideally you want to keep them for life, and their children and their children's children. What is our aspiration around being a children and family friendly or arts organisation and making these venues family friendly? Because at the moment it's actually a huge chunk of programme which is very successful, but it's almost hidden in plain sight. We don't have a kind of particular vision or mission around it. So in terms of programmes, and I'll just talk about this a little bit longer and then say something briefly about what we're doing right now to move Horsecross forward, and also what we will be doing longer term. But programmes, as I said at the start, are absolutely key to getting Horsecross to a long-term sustainable future. At the moment, they are causing the approach to programming, I should say, is causing Horsecross some difficulties. There are some issues, I think, around making sure there is a really good understanding of audiences, both who they currently are and who they aren't. So who isn't coming through the doors of the theatre and the concert hall, and why not? And talking to them and reconnecting with them. So one of the things that I've asked Lou Kemp, who's the artistic director of Perth Theatre, to do, and she's spoken to this committee before, very inspiringly, I think, about her vision for the theatre. What I've asked her to do, together with the head of creative learning, who does a lot of work with schools and with wider communities, is to think about how we might create a community roadshow that can go out and about across Perth and Kinross, will be fun to come along to, but will give Horsecross and its team a chance to talk to local people and communities about what they want their theatre, because it is their theatre, to be and present, and get some co-design of programmes going. So Lou is having a look at that. Place and context is really important. And again, the challenge, if you like, the question that I've set the programming team is, what is it that Horsecross presents and that you want it to present, which is absolutely unique and distinctive to Horsecross and to Perth and Kinross? What do you want to be able to say in terms of, come here, come and see this, it's amazing. You won't see it anywhere else in Scotland, possibly the UK. That is not the same as suggesting that every single show or every single artist who performs is only local, into whatever we mean by that. It may also be about bringing work of UK or international quality to local audiences for the first time. And there are some great examples actually of where Horsecross already does that. Classical concert earlier this year, the only place it came to in the whole of the UK was Perth. But we perhaps could be singing a bit more loudly about that. Quality and excellence, that is crucial. We've got to remember that the council is not the only core funder of Horsecross. Creative Scotland is its other core funder, and it funds Horsecross to really focus on artistic excellence, and that depends to a large extent on its relationships with other arts organisations, theatres, production companies, and so on. And peer review, you know, a bit of support and challenge around what are we doing, how do we know that what we do is great, how do we challenge ourselves to do better, is just what you would expect to see in a healthy, high-performing organisation of any kind. Cost and risk, these two things are absolutely connected. One of the things, again, it goes back to Scott's presentation that we're working with Horsecross senior colleagues on, is making sure that everyone in the organisation has a true understanding of production costs, programme costs. So that's not just what it costs to hire the actors and the artists, build the set, etc. It's the direct costs, but it's also the indirect costs, marketing, putting on extra staff to keep the bar open after a show finishes, overtime that might be required, and making sure everyone understands that in advance. Budgets are well constructed, as far as possible they're stuck to, and understanding risk. So if we're putting on a show, if Horsecross is putting on a show which maybe is work that hasn't been presented in Perth before, it's new, it may be controversial, it may be experimental, Horsecross should be doing that, but it should be taking a careful look at what the risks are financially, reputationally, operationally, and weighing those up in advance. So if things work, that's great, you do more of them. If they don't work, we learn from that in terms of what's programmed next time. So finally, and thank you, convener, wider improvements, as Scott alluded to, and as I think all committee members are aware, we have an advisory group which has been set up on a short-term basis to oversee improvements to Horsecross over the next few months. That includes Horsecross senior officers themselves, alongside the chief executives of the other two ALIOs that the council commissions services from, Culture Perth and Kinross, and Live Active Leisure. And those other two ALIOs have brought a huge wealth of experience to bear on the group, which I think has been enormously helpful actually for everyone who is working hard to get Horsecross to a good place. So the things that are underway right now, you can see there on the slide. Financial management, Scott has talked about. There are some wider improvements that I think need to happen in terms of internal systems and controls to do with finance. As I said in relation to programme just now, really understanding expenditure, direct costs as well as hidden indirect costs, and making sure that everybody who needs to know about those knows about them, and that the organisation has got the right systems and checks in place to make sure that expenditure is monitored and controlled as it needs to be. Marketing and social media, there is a small and very dedicated team in Horsecross working on marketing. It's a very broad programme that they have to promote, so that's quite challenging. But again, we think that there are things that could be done to change that for the better. Social media is incredibly important, as we all know, whether we like and enjoy social media or not, but it's incredibly important for promoting an organisation's brand and personality and distinctive voice. At the moment, the Horsecross social media accounts, there's various different officers in Horsecross who are tweeting and going on Instagram and Facebook and so on. There's no social media presence for the bars and cafes, which are really important for creating a buzz and a vibe about the place, so we're having a look at that. Profitability of the commercial functions I've spoken about. And when I say relaunching the theatre, I think we've all learnt with hindsight the theatre will have been open for 2 years in November, that if we could go back and do that again, there are things that we would probably do differently. Lou Kemp, the artistic director of the theatre, is passionate about making that a real community asset at the heart of the community. And so how we kind of redevelop that and relaunch that for the next few years is crucial. Longer term things, and these will be underway by the end of this year. Councillors, they may not necessarily be concluded. And again, these are things that I've talked about with Horsecross staff, and also sought and obtained approval from the board last month. We need to look at the organisational structure, and staff themselves have got their own views about how that could be better and strengthened, where we're lacking skills and capacity. And we might need to build that up, where some of the teams are maybe not structured in the most logical way. We are doing a review of the governance of the board, because it is normal and healthy to look at the skills matrix of a non-executive board regularly. Horsecross board have been doing some work on that over the last 12 months, but really look hard at what skills, knowledge and experience Horsecross will need in the longer term to take it forward. And finally, pay and grading. I'm conscious that questions have been asked by this committee and other councillors about some of the terms and conditions that are in place for some Horsecross staff, and just looking at the pay and grading structure overall. Again, we think that that is probably overdue for a review and a refresh. So work has begun on that and will be reported back to the Horsecross board in October at its next board meeting. So that's the end of my slides. Convener, thank you, councillors, for your time.
Thank you, Fiona. I'll pass over to the representatives of Horsecross. And is it Magnus? Do you want to chip in first, or
yes, I'll say a few words. First of all, we're really grateful to Fiona and Scott, who've helped us through a difficult period, as you will appreciate, and have brought a greater sense of stability to the whole operation, which we've appreciated. And I think Fiona has highlighted some of the issues that we face. I would put probably top of that list getting the financial stability that we need. Until we truly have drilled down and seen where the key issues are, we can't sort of get on top of them in the longer term. I believe that we now know more, thanks to Scott, about how we're functioning than we did before. We had an interim finance manager, which was not an entirely satisfactory situation, but we've now, with Scott, we're discussing how we put in place a really strong and permanent finance team which will take us forward. And that's probably one of the main things we need to address. Fiona's also highlighted the programming. The concert hall, I think, has a pretty good balance of what we're required to do, which is high quality classical music. I'm constantly impressed by how we get some of the highest grade performers in the UK. I mean, it's very interesting looking at the proms in London this year, how many of the performers on that stage had actually appeared in this concert hall first. And they all say to us, I had a long conversation with that brilliant young cellist, K.U. Mason, who played at, Prince Harry and Meghan's wedding. And he and his sister gave a performance here, and they both spoke about the acoustics of the concert hall, what a pleasure it was to play there. So I think that combination of orchestral music and the piano Sundays and that kind of thing is one of the great qualities that Perth Concert Hall brings. But that balance between the popular, the comedy, and the more popular music that we have there is a pretty good balance. The theatre is the biggest challenge we face, and Fiona's highlighted that, and quite rightly too. We need to get that body of work which is going to bring audiences back into the theatre. I think we've always said it's not going to be done overnight. We need to build a local connection. We need to get across the idea that the theatre is part of Perth's cultural and social life, that it's integrated into what the community expects, and that people are going to want to come in through that door. We'd like to see the doors open longer. I mean, one of the hallmarks of a successful theatre, I think, is that people feel they can go there for coffee or to have a drink, as well as to see what goes on there. So that's work in progress. We're building on a body of work, and we need to get in also, because a lot of what we do is co-productions from outside, and there isn't always the kind of stuff out there that we can bring in that we think will be successful and will also deliver the quality that our regular funding arrangement with Creative Scotland demands. So that too is probably, I would put it, on the cultural side, our number one objective. And finally, two things. One, Fiona has been working with us for the last few weeks, but as she says herself, that's a temporary role, and we are holding interviews in early October for a new interim chief executive. We've had some quite strong applications. We're hopeful that one of them will prove to be the person who's going to take us forward, and we'll report back on that after that's happened. And on the board itself, it is absolutely vital that we get the governance right, that we get the right representation on the board, the right balance. My feeling is that we need to build a greater community involvement in that board, and we've been looking for, when we go out to advertise, applicants who come in and are real enthusiasts for the arts out there in the community, who can come onto our board and strengthen that link with the local community. That's one of the things also that we get, the right level of financial expertise onto the board to build that strength. So, in summary, once again, thank you to Scott and Fiona. They've done wonders for us and will continue to do so, I hope. We are looking to put in an interim chief executive to improve our governance, but above all, to make that theatre, which is such a wonderful building, and we're determined that it will be a huge success.
Thanks, Magnus. Jason?
Sorry. Scott has outlined some of the reasons why we found ourselves in the financial difficulty we did in July. I could add to it, but I think there's a lot I can add because he's really explained that following the first quarter results, they were slightly disappointing, and that primarily that was in the trading side, and that was a result of some poor food sales, basically. Interesting enough, one of them was a very large conference we held where they didn't want any food at all. And that rather surprised us. And then we also get affected by, if we have performances on there and they don't have an interval, we actually lose a lot in bar sales. So we try and encourage people to have an interval because that is beneficial to us. I think the key things from where we are now, and with Scott and his team's help, is looking forward to try and manage the deficit that we're forecasting at the moment to see if we can bring that down. And as Scott said, what will be important is once we've got through the first 6 months, i.e. the end of September, is to see where we are, because the second half of the year is where we really start to motor, and we're much busier, and we can hopefully pull back some of that deficit. There have been difficulties in the past with our forecasting, and Scott alluded to that, and we've known that, and we've tried times to get it better. Unfortunately, with the loss of our financial manager back last November, that did have an impact on that. And you know, we're not right yet, but I'm sure with Scott's help, we will get that right as we go forward, because it is vital to know where we are going. I would endorse what Magnus says in terms of the new interim chief executive. It's important that he will come in and build on some of the work. Or she, exactly. Apologies, right. Or she. Build on the work that Fiona's done in terms of investigating where we are and how we need to improve our performance so that we can provide a good service for the council and for the community here. And I think that's all I would say at the present time.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank all four of you for your insight into it. But before I open up to questions, and I'm sure there'll be questions for moving forward and probably some retrospective questions, I'm sure that I speak for every single person in this room that we all want to see Horsecross in a stable position and providing continuing to provide good opportunity for the people of Perth and Kinross. So I'll now open up to questions. Councillor Dugan.
Thank you, Convener. I share that those wishes for the organisation going forward. And I welcome the analysis that we've had from council officers and the comments that we've had from the members of the Horsecross board that are here just now. In particular, I'd like to initially alight upon the comments that were made about the unsatisfactory nature of the tenure of the previous interim finance manager. I know that I and other colleagues on this committee were a little cross, to say the least, that after hearing from that particular person, their advice that they gave to this committee was in very short order found to be somewhere distant from the reality of the finances of Horsecross. And it's not for me to say why that was, but it appears to me to be that we were either misled or that there was an unacceptable degree of incompetence about the information that was provided. So I wonder if the Horsecross board have any ambition or intent to contact that individual and ask for a refund of the not inconsiderable amount of money that Horsecross paid to them to undertake the financial stewardship of the organisation.
Can I just pick up on a couple of points there? If you remember, Peter Winkles came into this committee, the Scrutiny Committee, on his own. I was meant to be there, but you overran by about an hour and a half, and I couldn't stay. I think it was very unfortunate that he had to, as it were, speak without any backup from the board and as a temporary finance director. He is, in fact, extremely experienced. I think it would be most unfortunate if it wasn't recorded that he is one of the most experienced finance people in the arts world in Scotland, having worked, I've known him way back to my Arts Council days, and he's been involved in Scottish Opera, Perth Concert Hall, etc. I've looked back at the evidence he gave. He gave as good an appreciation as he had at the time of the situation, and I think it's a little unfair just to pile any more accusations on his presentation. Some of these things that Scott and Fiona have talked about, which emerged later, were things that he hadn't at that stage anticipated. So I just want to place on the record that I think he did some very good work for Horsecross in identifying a lot of the problems that we faced on the financial side. I don't know if
Well, I would endorse what Magnus says. Peter Winkles is a very experienced accountant, and I apologise on the board's behalf if this committee feels that they were misled by him. I've seen several times the YouTube of the committee meeting, and I do not believe he misled the committee at all. He said that at that time, the 12th of June, and at that stage he was only working on figures for this year of April for certain, and maybe just had got the May figures, that they were very challenging. It was a very challenging time for us, and on the cash side, that we were very dependent on getting the 180,000 that the council had promised us in lieu of last year's deficit. That wasn't available at the 12th of June, and the fact that it did, well, most of it came through in July, which was very well received by Horsecross board. But he said it was a challenging time, and he said that the budget, which was a break-even budget for this year, would be a challenge in itself. And we always review our budgets after the first quarter. When we've done a quarter, we'll have a look and see where that is and how we should revise that for the full year. Now, of course, that hadn't happened by the 12th of June. So I don't believe he misled this committee, but if the committee thinks he did, I would apologise on the board's behalf.
I'll refer back to that, and I will not be in strong condemnation of misled. I think it was unfortunate. Yes, we did overrun, but we moved. It's important for people to understand that we moved Horsecross's timing to suit the members of the board of Horsecross from 1 o'clock, and then the other business overran. So it was a timing issue, and it was unfortunate that Peter had to be on his own, but I understand the reasons why. The difficulty we as a committee had, and we did raise at the time, is we had nothing in front of us. It was a verbal update which gave us no baseline. We were told that things were improving, performances were improving, attendances. We were told by how much they were improving, but we were not given a baseline of where they were improving from. So it was very hard for the committee to, if you say ticket sales are up 20%, but they were only at 20% before, it's context that we didn't have because we had no submission in front of us for us to look at. It was answering to verbal things. So I think it made it hard for the committee, and it was unfortunate, as well, I will say, but I'll pass it back to Councillor Dugan.
Yeah, Convener, thank you. I'll take that as a no then, that Horsecross aren't going to be looking for some compensation. And just to be very clear, I left the door open to the fact that it could be incompetence as well. So I didn't say which it was. I said what it felt like it may be one of two. But I think either way, any honest assessment of his tenure in Horsecross would conclude that the situation with the finances was extremely volatile up to and including the point of his departure. So I'm not sure if anybody would judge that to be good value in any way, shape or form. However, moving on, if I can, Convener, can I ask the best person, whether it's Scott Walker or not, what is it that's underneath the charitable deficit that formed a part of his presentation, which is growing? What are the actual drivers of that?
Sorry, I maybe didn't get the charitable side is showing a surplus of 17,000. It's the trading part of the organisation that is dragging the projected outturn down. Sorry, so you're looking at final outturns. Sorry, I thought you were looking at the current year. I'm going to hand over if you wanted to answer that one. Sorry, apologies.
I think part of the answer, we don't have all of the answers at this stage. Councillor Duggan, you'll appreciate Scott and I and the team have only been in and about for a few weeks. I think part of the answer to how we fix this, and you know, I know that's what we're all focused on, is how we make this better. It does lie in the approach to programming. So you've got some, you know, really passionate, committed and very creative people in Horsecross who are all very focused on presenting great work. And this is what I meant, I think, when I alluded to the need to get some internal systems and controls set up and working. What there isn't at the moment is a joint approach to programme decision making and budget monitoring and control. So that, I suspect, is part of the answer. Is making sure there's a good shared understanding of what the programs are costing to deliver and what they are generating in income. We are also, as I said in my presentation, looking at the profitability of the commercial activities, particularly the catering side, the food and drink side, and how we can make that work harder for the organisation as a whole. Again, there are some really fantastic staff in there, I think worth mentioning. For example, the head chef, Martin, who catered the Solheim Cup Gala dinner last Wednesday evening in the concert hall. Absolutely spectacular event, spectacularly, fantastically catered. So there are great people in Horsecross. What is perhaps lacking is more systematic ways of working, particularly in relation to budgeting and expenditure control, which I think can be relatively straightforwardly put right.
You have a supplementary, Convener?
You can't.
So, just following on from that, Fiona, you said in your presentation about the challenges that Horsecross face in terms of their forecasting, the financial forecasting, and I think it's a fair point to say that any organisation, a forecast is a forecast. You know, it's not subject to subsequent reality. But what I want to understand is, if we were to alight on a particular performance, say from the concert hall, say last year, we picked up a given performance or production run, could we at this stage take a look at the cost of that show, the revenues that it generated across the organisation in terms of ticket sales and hospitality and catering? Could we say how much that generated, that booking, how much it generated for the organisation?
What I would say is that at the moment, the organisation is not well set up to understand the total cost of putting on any given production, both the direct costs and the indirect costs. One of the things that we've started to encourage the teams to do once a week is actually look at that, you know, just take the temperature of how are we doing, anything that's lagging behind in terms of financial performance, anything we can do to address that. So it is difficult for Horsecross to do what you're quite rightly saying it should be able to do. Part of that is the financial systems, as Scott alluded to in his presentation, aren't working well for the organisation. Partly it's to do with, I think, getting more of a shared team view of costs and income potential, and getting everybody lined up in the same direction on that. I think and I've spent quite a lot of time talking to Horsecross staff over the last few weeks. I haven't by any means talked to all of them, and so what I'm saying doesn't represent everybody's views. But I think one of the issues, and this is very common in organisations that are in financial difficulties, as you'll know, Councillor Duggan, is people can't get ahead of the curve. So in many cases, people know what needs to be done. It's not that they are unsighted on that, but they simply have not been able to carve out the time to do it. So, for example, a new diarying system has been put in place, which diaries and schedules events and bookings right across both venues. That's a new system. When it's up and running fully 100%, it's going to work really hard for the organisation, but people haven't had the time yet to get it working 100%. Same with the financial systems. I think Scott will correct me if I'm wrong, but the financial systems that Horsecross has purchased in the past, the accounting systems, are good systems, but the time has not necessarily been found to get them working in the way that they need to. So it's not, I think, in any way badness or lack of will on anyone's part, but it's quite hard to stop the hamster wheel, if you like, to get off and do these things.
Thanks. Councillor Ahern, then Councillor
Thank you very much, Convener. I've changed part of my question based on what Fiona's just said there. We're talking about 2 venues in Perth that put on productions. The main part of the income is getting people coming in to watch these productions. And I've asked this question before in Scrutiny Committee when Horsecross have been here before. In the production, there's 2 things that Fiona said in her presentation was programming is the key and we're never going to get to 100% capacity. And I understand we'll never get to there, that's something we want to achieve. But in the program analysis, some of the figures there were less than 50%. The target was less than 50% of capacity. And if you're ever only going to try and reach 50% or that target, you're never going to get a decent profit. And when we look back over the years, and which is why I've asked the question in the past, we don't get quality productions. And I'm a little concerned that the answer to Councillor Dugan's question there was, don't know the cost of putting on a production, which is rather concerning. If you don't know what the costs are for putting on a production and your target is only 50% of what you potentially could make, you need to concentrate on the programming. And we need to be a bit more ambitious in the programs we put on. And I just want to ask that question, why, once again, are we asking the question of not putting on quality productions that probably put in other places in the country to produce a decent or even some sort of decent return from a production?
Thanks. I think I'll try and answer a couple of bits and then I'll pass on. I think that the targets, you will have to set as a realistic target, because that'll be your target to get the budget, that you will get coming in. And if you fall beneath that target, it's going to affect your budget. But I understand what you're saying. But I'm sure that these budgets have been set, these targets have been set challengingly. I do think that all the reviews, etc., that we have of the shows that are put on by Horsecross, that they are quality, and they're well recognised as such. But I'll pass it over to, I don't know if quality is maybe what the terminology you meant, Councillor Ahern.
Not necessarily quality, but what people are looking for. I mean, I've been to both the theatre and the concert hall quite a few times, and I have never been asked in any survey, what would I like to see after I've come out of a production, or even at half time, what would I like to see to come to either venue?
Yeah, I understand that, and I think that's a better phraseology than quality. Okay.
I'm sure Fiona will have something to say about that. Targets are, you need to be realistic about targets, and this building up of a really convincing programme for the theatre is, as I've said, the biggest task we face. We've got to get it right. We haven't got it right yet. We've had fantastic reviews for shows. I mean, I'm really pleased about that, because if we hadn't, if they'd been mediocre, that would have been a very poor start. But I agree that we need to get a better balance of the mainstream, what I would say the mainstream, as well as maintaining the the quality of what we do. And that's not going to be done overnight. And it's work in progress. But I really am convinced that we are beginning to build up a kind of the right approach. Our marketing is critical. And I would say that that's something where we will do the best we can, but we also need to feel, and this is something I keep on saying, I'd like to feel that the way we market the theatre is done hand in glove with the council. I mean, we've just had the Solheim Cup, right, which has been fantastically marketed by the council. I mean, you cannot move without seeing that up there. I'm not saying that we should do that with every one of our productions, but I would like to see that when we've got a show coming on that we think is going to appeal to a wide audience, that we're right there at the heart of what the council is doing in terms of promoting it, as well as doing it ourselves. I'd like to see a greater degree of involvement and partnership on that.
I would say with the Solheim Cup, the problem there is that one of the slides there was 70% of the people came from within Perth and Kinross. And the Solheim Cup, I would say a large percentage came from other continents, not just here. So I think it's apples and pears there a little bit.
But we'd like to get more, you know, we'll get there. I mean, that's what we'd like to do too.
Just briefly, first of all, actually, I think, and this is my personal view, quality is exactly the right word to be using. As we said, as we've all already acknowledged, you know, quite a large part of what Horsecross delivers in the concert hall is mainstream, if you want to use that word. It's very important for the financial sustainability of Horsecross, but actually as importantly, if not more importantly, people really enjoy those programmes. And part of my message, I think, to the Horsecross staff so far has been actually that word quality is something we can and should be applying to all aspects of the programme. Neither Horsecross nor the council are arbiters or arbitrators of people's taste. Horsecross is funded by the council to offer a very broad programme which will appeal to a broad range of audiences. On targets, Councillor Ahern, some shows, for various reasons, they're very experimental, they're very niche, will have a low target, and that's realistic. And some shows will have a high target, which is also equally realistic. What matters is that targets are practical, pragmatic, achievable, and stretching at the same time. The problem that Horsecross has got itself into at the moment is that in order to try and make the budget balance, it has set targets for some shows which are not realistic, not achievable, and are very, therefore, demotivating for staff. So part of the work that we're doing is about trying to get a real sense, which we will come back to this committee with, of what it costs to deliver a broad programme which appeals to a broad range of audiences. And the final thing I would say about your point about being asked, again, I think the marketing team is a small team and finds it quite hard to get ahead of the curve, but it is very conscious, I think, of the need to do more survey work and evaluation, formal evaluation with audiences of what they think of the shows that are put on, but it is more than that, and it is about going out and talking to local people and communities about, in particular, their theatre, because it is their theatre, and what they would like to see happen in there. And as I say, that is a piece of work which I've asked to be put in train as a priority.
Thanks. Yes.
Yeah, just a comment there that Magnus brought up about we get really good reviews, and you've mentioned quality there. You need to ask because we're only attracting 30% of the audience to come back again. So something's not working if we're only getting 30% of an audience to come back again to see another show.
Thanks. Councillor McCall.
And thank you to Councillor McKeown as well for my microphone control. My question is really a little bit around the targets. Is that whether or not the value of the target is in fact what was in the forecast for the budget? Would that have been, is that the same thing?
In relation to the programmes that I've just talked you through, Councillor McCall?
Yes.
Yes and no. One of the, without going into too much detail, because it's a level of operational detail which is probably not right for this committee, but I think one of the issues which again we need to put right is making sure that clear targets are set well ahead of time for each show. Sometimes that's happening at the moment, but not always. So that's why both Scott and I gave you the caveats when we presented the financial position, which is what we know up until the end of August and what has been forecast to year end. There will be further shifts before we get to year end, and part of the answer to getting to a more accurate projected outturn is a review of how targets have been set for these big strands of programme, classical music, other and drama, because there isn't a consistent approach to target setting there. Sorry, that's not a perfect answer, but that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you, Fiona. My question really was whether or not these targets were included as forecasts within the budget, not so much of how they were set.
I think the answer is mostly, but not comprehensively.
If I have one supplementary, if I may, please. This is really a question around the cash flow. I did ask this question at a previous committee some time ago, and it's really about advanced ticket sales and the cash that they generate. And I remember it was, I can't remember which committee date it was, but it was introduced as a recovery measure to try and improve cash flow at the time. And I did raise a concern that those funds may not necessarily be available for day-to-day running costs, and I was assured that those funds were ring-fenced in terms of the accounts, so that you wouldn't be at risk of exposure if a show was cancelled for whatever reason. So I'd just be curious to know what reserves are in place for advanced ticket sales.
Horsecross has no reserves as of the 31st of March 2019. We are getting weekly cash flow reports. All of the cash flows we're receiving just now are all positive. I think it is fair to say we are using settlement cash to run the business, but I don't think that's unusual in terms of cash flow. But the projections going forward mean that we are able to settle those settlements as they come forward. There are no issues between now and the end of May 2020.
But just to add to what Scott says is right, but your point is absolutely right, that organisations shouldn't be relying on advanced ticket sales routinely to pay the day-to-day bills. That has been an issue for Horsecross in the past. Back in 2013. It is something that I think the organisation is much more conscious of, but to me, again, this really comes back to how the organisation, when it makes big financial decisions and when it makes decisions about programming, it is quite systematically assessing risk. And part of that, as you say, if you've got a major show booked in and actually the artists cancel, thinking about that in advance in terms of the risk assessment and the strategic risk profile for the organisation as a whole. And again, I think that is something which historically Horsecross has not done routinely, but needs to start doing routinely. Because you're quite right, all sorts of funny things and unexpected things can happen.
Yeah, I think, if I may, Convener, this was raised last year after there was quite bad weather. And a number of shows were cancelled, not because the artists cancelled, just because people couldn't travel, and including the artists to get to the show. And so I would hope that in the accounts going forward there is some at least provision in the accounting line for advanced ticket sales so they can be recorded as a potential liability. Obviously reducing as time goes closer, but it is a risk.
Thanks. It's really to Jason, this one. In another life, I'm on Live Active Leisure Board, and I'm on the Finance and Governance Committee of Live Active Leisure. And we do see very detailed reports on every facet of that organisation's constituent parts, the same, well, many of them similar to yourself. I was just wondering what, your role, etc., and what the Finance and Policy Committee of Horsecross, if they see this level of detail and they're involved, and at what stage did the Finance and Policy Committee become aware of the deteriorating financial situation in July, and how were they able to influence what was moving forward? So that's the first sort of tranche of questions. And the second question I would have is, I don't believe that the council are charging for the services of, or cross-charging for the services of Mr. Walker or Ms. Robertson. So I may have been wrong, but were these services not offered prior to the interim finance director being employed? And it may have been a saving if we'd moved earlier into taking council officers in to help the organisation.
The Finance and Policy Committee was primarily made aware of these when they had a meeting in early August. But having said that, the deterioration arose in July, at which time I was heavily involved in that with our interim finance manager, and we didn't seek to have a special committee meeting to deal with it, but I myself was involved in that. And as the committee, we received the quarterly accounts for our committee meetings, which we always hold before the board meeting. Those are gone through in detail, and if there are any untoward numbers, if you like, then we will seek to understand why. And in fact, in the meeting in August, one of the key areas that we wanted going forward on the cash flow, to pick up on Councillor McCall's point about advanced ticket sales, is that although we have cash in our bank, how much of that cash is actually ours? Because quite a lot we are collecting money on behalf of third parties, and that's one of the areas that we've asked to be changed. I don't think it's yet come through on the cash flow, but that's the difficulty we have is the lack of resource in the finance department. So I was brought aware of the financial problems in the middle of July when our interim finance guy came back from holiday. You'll recall that the interim chief executive had left at the end of June, so there was a bit of a vacuum for the first fortnight in July. And it was only once he picked up the numbers and looked at the cash flow that we could see that actually what had been forecast was wildly inaccurate. So in terms of looking at what the outturn for the year, that came through once the June results came through, which would have been the end of July, and we met in the early part of August to discuss those and decide what we would do. But of course, by that stage, we were in detailed discussions with the council. The council had come to our rescue in terms of cash support, and we were looking to really firefight the cash problems that we had. Turning to your second question regarding additional support by way of staff from the council, I think there were discussions, but I don't remember that there was any formal plan to put people in, and certainly not following the departure of our finance manager. We have had people from the council before, we're appreciative of that. I think over the last 18 months we were offered somebody out of Scott's department at a fairly low level, but a useful level to us, but for some reason that wasn't taken up. I don't know, perhaps.
Just to clarify for the committee convener, a member of corporate finances accounting team, their services were offered to Horsecross in last autumn. I believe the interim chief executive declined that offer. I'm not close to the detail of that, but that's
But, sorry, just to finish that, we weren't made an offer of a finance manager at that level. What we were offered was, as Fiona says, at a lower level than that.
I don't think Fiona actually said at what level at all, lower or not. I think that's an assumption that it could have been at any level. It may have been helpful. So just following on to that, I've noted here that the projected deficit is 74,000. In light of how confident, we'll say, are you that that this projection will be correct? And I know it's a difficult act because we're talking forecasts here, but is that best guess at this time?
Yes, that forecast is based on the fact that we were behind in the first quarter, and therefore we've adjusted the forecast going forward. I think, as I said earlier, when we've got through the first 6 months, i.e. the end of September, we will have a better idea. Our busy time is the second half of the year. Scott and his team are still doing some work on our numbers and things, and we may have to revise it after that. But I think there's a fair chance that that will be the correct one. And I would hope we'd be able to pull some of that back, because a lot of the downside on that is on the food and drink sales. And the theatre's been closed for 2 months. It's back open again. Hopefully we can start to get some of those numbers back up.
Okay, my final question before I hand over is, it's really to you, Magnus. Being a board member again of a different alio, do you feel that the board, the full board, is appraised of the financial situation to a strong enough degree? And if so, why are they not asking questions? We have very robust discussions, and not everybody sings from the same. We make it quite difficult for officers at Live Active Leisure. So I was just wondering if it's the same sort of environment when discussing the financial matters.
Well, I don't know what your environment is, but we ask very detailed questions at our board meetings. We receive pretty detailed reports which are shared in advance. There are questions arising out of those figures which come to the attention of the board, and which the board scrutinizes. I'm not quite sure whether you are implying that somehow we don't ask the questions. We do ask the questions. The circumstances have been explained as to why we were caught up in this crisis at the end of July, beginning of August, once that crisis had occurred, the steps were taken which have been outlined to you by Fiona and by Scott. But I'm pretty confident that we do ask those questions. I do, however, think that the board, the board has been in place that really dates, I suppose, the core of that board dates back to when I took over in 2013. And though I say it myself, it's a very strong core, but it does need to be expanded, and it does need to change and be brought up to date and to reflect, as I say, the local input, and also perhaps, given that we've been through this period, it's certainly something we're very aware of, that aspect of the board probably does need to be strengthened.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. I've got a number of questions. I think probably the first is for Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker, could you bring your presentation back up? And could you flip to the cash flow based the 24th of June 2019 slide, based on cash flow as at 17th of June 2019. That's the one. So this was the cash flow, as far as I understand it, Mr. Walker, which was not causing concern. Can I just, I'm not following this. So first of all, what I noticed was in the total expenditure line, there's a big leap from roughly about the 130,000 mark up to 377,000, then 471, 438, 549,000 in that bottom row. Whereas the income seems to be much more variable. But just, could you take me through the first few the first few columns? In each one, the income seems to exceed the expenditure, but the balance carried forward at the bottom isn't increasing, it's decreasing. So if income exceeds expenditure, how can there not be an increasing amount of money carried forward?
I will have to check that that is the right section of the cash flow that we have cut and paste. The cash flow is very detailed. It's done very line by line, line by line, over a number of weeks and months. And I wonder if we have not cut in the important rows. The highlighted row is the cash flow projected position going forward. So that's what we discussed, and there are no immediate issues based on that pro forma.
Okay, but I mean, there might be rows missing, but it does say total income, total expenditure. In each of those first few columns, the income greatly exceeds the expenditure, and yet the balance carried forward is reducing. That would, you know, there may be other information which can fill that gap. I'm just saying, on the basis of it, that doesn't look like a cash flow which makes any sense to me.
And I think what I'm saying is that I will need to come back to you. I'll need to go into that and expand the whole document so that I can come back to your question.
Okay, and what would also be useful to know is what the leap is from the expenditure of roughly 130,000 leaping up in a way that the income doesn't also leap up, I think. If that's okay, oh, sorry.
Councillor Farrett's going to come in and maybe illuminate the answer.
Councillor, my reading of those figures is that if you look at the very first column, there's a balance carried forward of 87,000. That's actually the total income of 210 minus 122. The next column, it's the balance carried forward per period. It's not cumulative. So the figures are consistent, that they're not a cumulative figure, that they are a per period figure. And the graph there doesn't show any cumulative figure line.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, so the balance carried forward.
Yeah, the balance brought forward column is included within the total income.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's misleading, so apologies for that. But the bottom highlighted row is the cash flow position.
Right, okay. So then, thinking about the cash flow position, you know, looking towards the end of I think we were told that looking forward towards the end of the year, that at that point in time we were projecting a positive outturn at the end of the year. We're now looking at a 74,000 deficit at the end of the year, although, you know, variations, I think you said in your presentation, Mr. Walker, could affect that. What is that deficit as a percentage of the overall financial position of Horsecross?
So £74,000 is out of it's about 5 million turnover, Fiona. So 74,000. It's about 1.5%.
Okay, thanks. And could I just clarify, on the money provided by the council, there's mention of 130,000, and I think Mrs. Robertson, I don't know whether it's Mr. Walker or Mrs. Robertson question, I think you said it was 130,000 plus VAT, and I was just wondering why, if there's a grant from the council to Horsecross, why VAT is payable. But there's also mention of a £180,000 figure. Is the 130,000 a subset of the 180,000, or is it in addition to the 180,000?
So it's 180 in total, 130 has been paid, and there's 50 still outstanding, is that correct?
Yeah, and just to go back to the first, yeah, absolutely. And the first part of the question, there's VAT applied because we contract with Horse Cross to take forward our cultural business. Therefore, that's vatable, and that's a positive impact in terms of what Horse Cross can recover on their input VAT. So there's actually VAT applied on our £1.1 million worth of annual SLA as well.
Okay. Mr.
Fiona?
Robertson wanted to come in.
Was that on? Yes, great. Sorry, it was just, Councillor Stewart, it was just briefly on your question about, as Scott says, these figures are collapsed down. Councillor Parrott's right, but in terms of your question about why does expenditure rise towards the second half of the year, part of that will be to do with increased expenditure on production costs. So the pantomime, which is a really significant earner for the theatre, has got associated quite high levels of expenditure, and that will be, I would guess, we'll go back and check, but that will be why there is forecast increased expenditure, which appears to look quite different from patterns of expenditure over the rest of the year.
Okay, and just to understand, going back to the, thanks for that, for the clarification on the earlier point, the 130 part / 180 total, that wasn't obviously paid at the start of the financial year following the allocation of it in the Council's revenue budget in February. The first tranche of it went through in July when the cash flow problems became apparent. I'm just wondering whether the cash flow problems would have been there had it been transferred over from the start of the financial year.
I think it would always be staggered payments throughout the year, but I'll pass that over.
Just, I'll start this one. The cash flow problem would have been there. The cash flow we received in July dropped to £250,000 negative, so therefore even if we paid the full 180, there would still have been a cash flow issue. It was only because of the Creative Scotland grant was accelerated from October to July/August, which allowed us to close that gap.
In terms of the question about, I mean, Scott's, if we had paid the full £180,000 in February, or as soon as the council had set its budget, Councillor Stewart, the cash flow issues would still have been there. Again, without going into too much detail, one of the things that we are trying to improve quite quickly is expenditure control across different teams. So, for example, salary costs, making sure that we don't have staff accruing large amounts of overtime or additional hours, because that's expenditure which is unbudgeted for, and that has tripped Horse Cross up in the past. The reason, however, why we did not and would not have paid over the £180,000 in full at the beginning of the year is because it was made clear to the Horse Cross Board by the Chief Executive of the Council that there would be some very strict conditions attached to that funding, and it has taken some time to negotiate with the Horse Cross Board a set of conditions that both the Board and the Council were comfortable with.
And those conditions are now in place?
The key condition, Councillor Stewart, was agreement to set up the advisory group and also to enable Scott's team and myself to go in and work directly on a temporary basis with Horse Cross staff, senior staff, to get improvements underway.
Okay, just a couple more if that's okay, Convener. Thank you. Thanks for your indulgence. Just speaking about the advisory group and working in those sort of senior roles, can I just clarify, I mean, obviously with your position of Head of Culture Services within the Council, but the presentation talked about, or the briefing note talked about a sort of position of leadership within Horse Cross. Could I just understand a wee bit more, Mrs. Robertson, about how much operational control that that involves, if that's okay.
In terms of my role, Councillor Stewart?
Yeah.
So in terms of overall decision making, oversight of the organisation and accountability for the organisation, that sits with the Horsecross Board. The Horsecross Board is in charge of key decisions at strategic level, as it has always been. So for example, the pay and grading review, which I spoke about in my presentation, and the review of the organisational structure. I've given advice to the Horsecross Board that I think these pieces of work need to happen and how I think they should happen, and the board has formally approved and given the mandate for them to go ahead. In terms of day-to-day senior decision making, I think worth saying that there is a good senior management team in place already in Horsecross, and those staff are for the most part continuing to carry out their day-to-day roles. In terms of approval of expenditure and major operational decisions, they either come to myself or they come to Scott. And as and when appropriate, they are referred to the Horsecross Board for endorsement, like the pay and grading and organisational restructure examples I've just given.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Just to reflect, I think it was Councillor Hearn's question about the number of seats sold versus the total capacity, and the sales income from that versus the total potential value. I think I would also sort of reflect Councillor Hearn's concern there, but maybe with a slightly different slant. This is less of a question, more of a comment. I think it's not about setting the targets too low, but I think from looking at the graph, my slight wonder was about, or not wonder, my slight concern was about the difference between the capacity and the value of the tickets. The difference between the places sold and the value of the tickets sold. So the proportions on the two graphs in each of the drama, music and other were quite different. So you could sell more than half the capacity, but your income would be less than half of the total revenue available. So that there was obviously we seem to be selling lower value tickets, almost, if that makes sense. So that would be the concern in respect of those graphs, to add on to the concern of Councillor Hearns. I think the other thing that I would just like to reflect on is that we have sat here before discussing the saleability, whether we call it quality or not, but the saleability of the programming at Horsecross. And the programming risks that are undertaken. And I think that one of the things that the committee has reflected on in the past is just how broad the appeal is of the cultural offer from Horsecross. And so I think from my point of view, that's a message that I would like the managers and the board to take away, is just to really get a grip, get a handle, if you not get a grip, apologies, that's the wrong terminology, but get a handle on the marketability and the saleability in terms of, if for no other reason than just to stabilise the financial position, so that there is a strong basis on which you can, do some of the more experimental or niche works that, may well gather great critical reviews, but are not of such wide and mass appeal. There has to be a really stable ticket sales base in order to support some of that other work. That's why.
Can I just respond to that by saying I couldn't have put it better myself.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Stewart. He's very fond of his strong and stable comments. It's Councillor Reid, Councillor Dugan, and then Councillor Parrott, and then I'm going to. Well, you've not had a question yet, so because officers here waiting for the next paper. So.
Well, thank you, convener. I will try to be very quick. I'm I'm very reassured that we've got Fiona and Scott leading the right direction. Can I just point out that I am probably the target audience that you should be pointing out? Philistine, a person who is indifferent to culture and the arts, or who has no understanding of them. I am the person and my like that should be getting targeted. My first suggestion would be, can we change the name Horse Cross? As a incomer to Perth and Kinross, Horse Cross means nothing to me. It does not in any way signify arts or festivals or anything. I believe that there is a thing called Friends of Horse Cross. It's incredibly difficult to find unless you're really, really looking hard for it. Living out in the sticks of Auchterarder, I haven't a Scooby what's going on in the theatres. Every mail shot that I get from the council, could I suggest, should have a horse cross or whatever is flyer with it. If you're driving anywhere in Fife or Clackmannanshire, the Alhambra Theatre in Dunfermline hits you in the face, and almost in the telegraph poles. Maybe we should be looking at season ticket sales. But as a I'll finish now, 2 points. As a grandfather of 4 children ages 5 and under, that's a target audience. You get 4 children, you get 4 adults. You're doubling your thing. Now, quality is very difficult to define. Henry Ford described it as doing things right when nobody's watching. Well, hopefully that won't be the case in the theatres. But every highbrow or every populist performance that is put on has got to be a very high quality one. It depends on your perspective. If you're operatic bent or ABBA lookalike bent, then it's got to be high quality. And I will shut up at that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's good to hear a different take on it. And I would say that you may be a target of them now, not the target audience. But thanks, because there were some points in there about, you know, if you can get children along, it's like the pantomime you get. So thanks for your contribution there, Crawford. Councillor Illingworth.
I've got the programme in front of me. I think Councillor Reid, I'd suggest rip it up the 70s on the 12th of October as a Philistine event. I've been to 2 events recently at the theatre, both extremely enjoyable, both niche products, opera and a foreign language film, both sold out. Now, we're talking about 50% of the capacity. That's only a problem if the production is expensive. If you've got an expensive production, then you need 100%. If you've got a cheap production, then 50% is fine. It's a good result. It just depends on the cost of the product. Now, the question I have is around sales. It's around, to use a rude word, bombs on seats. Now, I have a great time when I go. It's a great experience, and sales and bums on seats is not the whole of the story, but are we getting more bums on seats?
Which seats? We're getting the right bums on some of the seats, but not all of the seats, as you've heard. And in terms of increase, I just reiterate that we would like you to be coming to, and indeed to all the Philistines out there, as well as art lovers out there, to be coming more and more to the theatre. That is our work in progress. I believe that we are developing a strategy that will achieve it, but it remains something that is not going to be done overnight, but we hope over the next year and 2 years. And looking forward, we want to see that theatre absolutely, not only as a theatre which appeals to local audiences, but it's playing a big part in the Scottish National Theatre scenario, because it has a contribution to make, needs to be aware of the fact that Pitlochry Festival Theatre is doing one kind of thing, Dundee Rep doing another, and the National Theatre of Scotland, which I've been to see the director of the National Theatre for Scotland, because we put a huge amount of taxpayers' money into the National Theatre for Scotland, and I think we need much more back from them in terms of productions that are going to come into our regional theatres and build audiences and raise the profile of Perth, as well as us producing our own material.
Thanks. Councillor Dugan.
Thanks very much, Convener. I wonder if I just might ask a very quick question of the board as they go forward into the recruitment process for an interim chief executive. Is it a reasonable thing to anticipate that in that selection process we may, because clearly, you know, this is a very distinct role for a chief executive to have, and there's the twin priorities of artistic merit and excellence to be pursued, and there's the priority of financial governance and balance to be pursued. And I've been fortunate enough to have dealt with certainly the last two chief executives that we've had, and found them to be very committed professionals in their time here. But is it a reasonable thing to anticipate that the next chief executive that we appoint on an interim basis, we may seek to find a candidate who has as much, if not more, given the interim nature of the appointment, financial and governance skill set as an artistic awareness?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And we've had one round of interviews, and we decided at the end of that not to appoint, because we didn't have such a person as your... It's not the easiest of jobs to fill. An interim job is not necessarily the easiest of jobs to fill. It's an interim because, of course, we don't know the outcome of the council's deliberations on a single cultural trust, so we can't advertise for a full-time job. But I'm quite impressed by the... You know, we've got 4 people lined up in the beginning of October. They've been given a very tight brief on precisely the lines that you're talking about. And I'm quite impressed by the standard of the 4 candidates that we'll be interviewing. But rest assured, you know, we ourselves will have very high standards, and we'll be asking some pretty searching questions of them.
Can I make a... Oh, sorry.
It was just briefly to say on your question, Councillor, because you're right, and I think all specialist organisations, it's a tough job for the chief executive, because they've got to be both passionate and knowledgeable about their sector, whatever that is, but they've also got to have business acumen. I think worth saying, alongside what Magnus has said, is the organisational restructure I see as key to this. So that chief executive needs senior people and skills around them who are looking at the operational effectiveness of the organisation, keeping an eye on the finances and so on, and we will be taking all of that into account when we put restructure proposals to the board later this year.
Thanks, Convener. We seem to have been merging comments and questions. I'd make a comment if I could. I would hate for any one councillor to think they have a monopoly on admiration for Horsecross. I don't know a councillor that doesn't have an admiration for Horsecross and the theatre and the work that's produced and the people that they bring into Perth City Centre. We're far richer as a community and environment with Horsecross than without it. And I listened to Councillor Ahern, and echoed by Councillor Stewart's concerns about capacity and targets. And we've heard from the board that targets are a challenging, often abstract thing to try and transact. But nevertheless, and you've spoken about Live Active Leisure, Convener, and I think I've said it before and I'll say it again, the vision that I and I think most councillors have for Horsecross is that financial stability which allows it to come off the council's day-to-day radar. We don't want to be scrutinising and policing financial matters of the organisation. Far better, we don't need to. And I think once you get to that financial stability and that there are consistent and surpluses of the required level within the organisation's trading situation, then that actually opens the door, as far as I can see, to much more experimental work that may not may not bring in those higher audience numbers, but which satisfy the need for creative challenge and issues of that nature. So I'm very hopeful that after this particular financial stress that the organisation is recovering from, that we get once and for all to a position whereby the stability is culturally ingrained. And Councillor Stewart mentioned GRIP. GRIP is an important, and corrected himself, the organisation requires GRIP. And that's the principal challenges I see of the new Chief Executive when they come in, is to have that grip and discipline across all elements of the business and take it forward into a stable structure from there.
Thanks, Councillor Dugan. I think that echoes what everybody in the room feels. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. My question, again, is about recruitment, but more about recruitment to the board and what the process might be, and whether or not you're considering doing more public appointments to the board so you can get a broader pool of candidates, perhaps?
We have to, it is a part of our remit and the guidelines that we have to advertise, and we will advertise. We've advertised once and we got a range of applicants. We didn't appoint because we felt that they were almost reinforcing what we already had rather than widening the range of what we had. I would hope, and I might sort of make this appeal to councillors here today, that you must all know of people who are in your constituencies who might be interested, not just interested in applying, but with the kind of skills that you think would enhance the board, so that when we advertise, those people are amongst the applicants. We've already identified through our contacts 1 or 2 people who are out there who have an enthusiasm for the arts, a knowledge of local culture and local organisations, and who would strengthen the board. And we hope that I've already interviewed one person who was recommended to me by one of the councillors on our board, a very, very good and strong young candidate. That's another thing that needs to be emphasised. We're all, speaking for myself, a bit on the sort of elderly side. So we need a younger intake as well. But if anybody has come across people who they think would be useful additions, do talk to them and tell them to watch out for when we launch this advertising campaign.
It's not a question, it's just a comment. Thank you for that. I mean, I would agree that advertising is the right way to go, and lots of public sector boards are being encouraged, in fact, to seek board members who are outside of the industry, to apply some challenge and some fresh thinking, or who may have strong skills. And I think you mentioned financial skills before, and so sometimes they're the people that will ask the off-the-wall questions you maybe don't think yourself because of the industry you're in. So I would welcome, I think it's a welcome thing that you're going to advertise this time around. Thank you.
Thanks. And to finish off, Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much. I'll just be short. We've gone on a very long time, but for whatever reasons, it strikes me that the financial shock, call it that, between mid-June and mid-July, if you look at the figures, is about equivalent to a month's income. And to me, a shock of that magnitude in a month is quite considerable. I've had some reassurance, but I would hope that I can be reassured that going forward, there are a number of improvements to budgetary and financial systems highlighted, but I hope that I can be reassured that there will be a remorseless focus from all board members of Horsecross on the financial systems and programme in assisting those who deal more directly with finance in seeking that financial stability that is the key to the success. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott, and thank everybody for their contributions, and thank the officers, and thank you, Magnus, and Peter. Jason, sorry, Jason, for attending, and again, I will just reiterate that we all, and say at the end of every meeting, we do all wish you all the best, and we hope that this is a step in the right direction, and we can move forward. Yeah, we'll have a 5-minute recess, and that'll give everybody a chance to move around and let the other officers come in. Okay, we'll reconvene the meeting now and move on to paper 5, which is the annual performance report. The annual performance report provides an overview of how the council has performed against its strategic objectives, and I will ask Barbara Redden to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Convener. Information within this report has been collated from all council services, recognising the need for a range of services to contribute collectively to delivery of improvement against the council's strategic objectives. Information has been drawn from service, business management and improvement plans and annual performance reports, the Designing Futures Together awards, data that measures performance against a suite of corporate performance indicators, and the local government benchmarking framework, as well as customer feedback and engagement. And as such, there is very little within the report that you haven't seen already, but this time it is, sort of a high-level summary of the council's overall performance. The recent Best Value Assurance report stated the following. Since the 2008 Best Value report, the council has improved at a steady pace. Overall, outcomes for the community are improving. The council uses performance management information and reporting to drive continuous improvement at service level, but annual public performance reporting should be more balanced. More could be done to consistently demonstrate that performance management drives change and improvement. Residents in Perth Kinross are more satisfied with their council services than the Scottish average, and the council has received positive inspection reports in recent years. So that's within that context that the recent, that the report also provided some recommendations that have helped to hopefully improve this year's annual performance report, which also covers the council's responsibility to report on performance to the public. The improvements made to date have focused on ensuring that the report is balanced and that our areas for improvement are more clearly identified. We have also improved the range and clarity of the information that is provided through Perth Kinross Performs, our online performance portal. We've worked with design to improve the presentation of the report, recognising it needs to be accessible to a range of audiences. It has made a notable difference to the overall appearance of the document, and I hope you'll agree with that, although we recognise that the text is still quite dense in some areas. However, the inclusion of case studies has helped to bring service delivery to life using films mostly drawn from the Designing Futures Together awards. The structure of the report is similar to previous years. It's split into the 5 strategic objectives with the corporate plan and an organised to deliver section. This latter section provides information on what is often termed back office functions required to enable the effective functioning of service delivery. There are many highlights outlined in the report, and but we've also then looked at where we need to improve, and indeed if we are going to improve given the resources that we have available and also the direction that the council is giving us. I've got more to say, but I think given the time, I'll finish. So I would like to say that this is the first time that the performance report has come to Scrutiny Committee in advance of the council, and we value the input that members will have to this approach. And finally, I'd like to give my thanks to both Louisa Dott and Fiona Mackay in particular, but the wider virtual performance team across services who have done a very good job in preparing this report. My colleagues and I are happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Barbara. So we'll open up the report. I too think it's a lot easier to understand, and we're having all the links there. It makes it a less dense document, and if you want to dive into something, you can select that yourself. So I think that is an improvement, definitely. So do I have any questions on this report? Councillor Ellingworth.
Hello. Can I ask who it's designed to be read by?
It's designed to be read by yourselves as elected members, but it's also designed to be read by our residents.
Do you have a follow-up to that, Councillor Ellingworth?
I think the comment you made about some of the text being rather dense is an accurate one. Some of the diagrams aren't put in context. For example, there's a diagram about 74% of children achieving literacy, or 76. Now, I'm not sure, looking at if that's a great thing, that we've got 76% achieving a target, or that it's a bad thing we've got 24% not achieving a target. and there's quite a lot of statistics in there that for an ordinary resident I wouldn't find gripping or interesting or want to pick up again and again.
I think I'll let Barbara answer, but I think it depends what you're interested in. Not everybody will be interested in the same thing. If you've got children, you may be interested in education. If you've got elderly relatives, you may be interested in that part of it. I don't think any document, the whole document, will appeal to everybody. But as I said, it gives an overview, and then with having the links, you can go into what actually interests you. So I think it's a good starter for starting point for anybody who wants to find anything out. Bill.
Okay. I think that, sort of Councillor Illingworth, you've picked up the bit that I missed from my opening remarks, and that is that, sort of we obviously are very keen to get feedback in relation to the look and, and the accessibility of the annual performance report, so that we, to do that, then we will be conducting a survey with residents and anybody else who wants to comment on that, and that, sort of the results of that will then help hopefully improve sort of the information that we're providing in future years.
Right, thank you.
Councillor McEwen was next.
Thank you, Convener. The question I've got comes from page 54, where the text says that lower the carbon usage, reducing our costs and meet the obligations that upcoming regulations require. That gives me an impression of us doing the bare minimum we have to when it comes to the climate emergency we're currently in. And I would like to sort of ask a question or pose a comment that could be commented on further, that we should be leading on this. Perth Kinross is both a rural and an urban council, and these green issues and the climate strategy, the opportunities that we have going forward are huge. And I'd like to see Perth Kinross actually lead on these matters, not just do the bare minimum of what's needed.
Thank you.
Apologies if that's the intention, the way that that's been read. It's absolutely not meant to be that. Sort of we have an incredibly positive and forward-looking, sort of energy team. We also have been doing quite a number of different things in terms of our housing stock and how we, sort of look forward to heating them in the future. And, sort of in terms of the strategy, when it comes to council, then I hope that you will see that we are wanting to be very leading edge, and we're working with partners to be able to do that as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Stewart.
Yes, so I think maybe picking up on just the Councillor Illingworth's initial question, there is a page, just let me find it quickly, apologies. So it's page 7 of the annual performance report, or page 25 of our document packs. The 2018-19 performance. We've got performance indicators, 27 of which are improving, 12 of which are steady, 10 of which need attention, then 4 of which where we can't appropriately report trends and targets, and 13 where information for 2018 and 19 isn't yet available. I don't know what those performance indicators are. I think probably if I went through the report and clicked on all of the links, but I think it would be useful if we're saying that there are, if this is our measure of performance that we're putting at the very start of our overview of key corporate performance indicators, I'd like to know what those indicators are, and on an individual basis, what the measure is, and what the parameter is, and what the measured performance is. And I think I would also like to know, we've got 10% of those performance indicators needing attention, but in a performance report, I think I will have said, Director Renton, previously that I used to work in quality assurance. And what we would do when writing up an audit report, I know it's not exactly the same, but broadly similar, is highlight separately general observations, strengths of a particular system that was being audited, and areas that needed improvement, or indeed areas that were non-conforming or non-compliant. I think it would be useful to you know, there are a lot. The report is very text heavy, but it would be very useful to have at least somewhere a summary of where we are missing our performance indicators, and where we need as a council to improve. I know that we do that, you know, through various mechanisms. We've got the BMIPs, we've got our different audit reports that we look at. But if this is our annual performance report, this is the opportunity to bring that information together, I think. And the other thing, I don't know if you wanted to come in on that. I've got another comment, but I'll let you come in on that maybe just now.
Happy, you know, sort of, I think that that's a really good idea. You know, what we can do is put on a front page to Perth Kinross Performs, and probably within this document, that would show, you know, sort of the RAG, you know, sort of which are improving, which are steady, and which need attention, which ones we can't report on, and then that will take you to the relevant page that is already within, you know, PKC Performs.
Okay, thanks. And the other thing I was going to reflect on was that one of the consultations that we did was, as a council, was the budget consultation. It's mentioned in at least one place, or maybe a couple of places in the report. I think maybe one place in the report, one place in the covering report, the budget consultation. One of the things that people reflected on in the budget consultation was that they wanted us to spend less money on corporate and democratic services. And I suspect that's because we just put in the budget consultation, do you want us to spend money on corporate and democratic services? And nobody generally actually has a clue what corporate and democratic services do, so they don't understand, for instance, that part of that corporate and democratic services budget would be the transfer to the ALUs, as far as I understand it, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, the transfer to the ALUs, Horsecross, CPK, Live Active Leisure, and people would presumably, if you put those in as line items, be less keen to see those budgets reduced than they would be to see a sort of, if you like, and with apologies to the head of legal and governance, a faceless corporate and democratic services budget line item. And yet, when I turn to third last page of the annual performance report, we've got corporate services there, a £99 spend out of the 1,216 council tax band D property. I think maybe just when we're talking about corporate services, we need to, for transparency for the general public, explain what that is a wee bit better. And then they can still make up their minds about whether they want money spent on it or not.
I think that we can put a link in, you know, sort of, so that would take you to exactly what those cost centres are, which may also include elected member salaries.
Okay, point taken, thank you.
The dark art of corporate services. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for the report. I love it, personally. It's much easier to read online, and I think it's much more interactive, which is right up my street. However, it does bring me on to my general point about the overall performance report, and it's really about inclusivity and access to services for those who are perhaps digitally excluded, not because there's no broadband, but because of whatever they may have some sort of impairment, either emotionally or sensory or whatever. And I know I've raised this in Service Committee before, but I think as a corporate level, we really need to look at every single one of these key objectives that we have at a high level and see how do we deliver for that sector of our population who are unemployed through disability or unemployed through mobility issues or whatever, and ensure that we build the prosperous, sustainable and inclusive economy that's for everybody, not just for those people who are able to access services more easily. So I'd like to see that thread running all the way through the performance report, going forward at least.
That is something that we're working on anyway, based on the comments that you've made previously, but we will certainly be striving. Yeah.
Thanks. On page 45 of 70 in the booklet, I'll raise again an old chestnut that I'm always raising. We've got how important our home assessment recovery team is, our HEART team. I was just wondering what the percentage of the heart team are actually fulfilling that the job they're badged for, and what percentage are actually making up for our inability to provide home care packages in rural areas in Perth and Kinross. And I was wondering if that was also the fact that people are being readmitted to hospital. Is that because we're moving them out of hospital too quickly? So I think Gordon might.
Thank you. So the percentage of people who are currently supported by heart who would otherwise and should be handed off to a home care service is currently sitting around 27%. We would agree that that's a number that is more significant and higher than we would wish. That reflects about 20 people in the north locality and about 23 people in the south locality. As you've alluded to, Councillor Lang, we've had some discussion about the potential that brings for us to reflect on the adequacy of the current arrangements and the balance that we have between in-house and external provision, and I've given you a commitment that we will reflect on that and we will review that. The answer to your question about whether or not that's a contributory factor to the increased number of people who are readmitted to hospital, I would certainly seek to give you some assurance that no one is lacking service. The challenge that we have is that people who would and should be receiving a service from an external provider, particularly in rural areas, those providers are increasingly struggling to deliver services because of that rurality, because of the challenge of trying to recruit and retain staff. So that challenges us to reflect differently, to reflect on whether or not a different model is necessary. We've already introduced enhanced premium payments for rural services, and still that presents us with a challenge. But those people who are being readmitted to hospital will not be being readmitted for the lack of any social care services. It will be for any number of other factors, and you're absolutely right to raise the question, because that's one of the very few indicators where the Health and Social Care Partnership in its annual performance report is not performing above the Scottish average and has declined in the last 12 months. And I can reassure you that we will be looking behind those figures to see what are the circumstances that will contribute to someone having to go back into hospital. If it's within 28 days, it would tend not to be necessarily for the same thing that they were in hospital previously. But we are looking at that in some detail.
Thanks very much. And I suppose some of these will be complex cases, and it'll be other ailments that they'll be befalling them rather than a reoccurrence of the original one.
I think that's entirely correct. As we're working with an increasingly older population, the prevalence of comorbidities of different types of conditions, including mental and physical conditions, are in themselves more prevalent, and it can be any number of factors that would result in someone having to go into hospital. Often it's falls, often it's UTIs, sometimes it can be other types of accidents or incidents or just general health issues.
Thanks for that. Councillor McEwen.
Thank you, Kavina. I took the opportunity to follow one of the links in the document, which has taken me to a page that nobody else can now see. So I will try and maybe describe what I'm actually going to ask a question about. And I'm sure that Barbara will know the answer, actually, because it's a very common thing. It's actually a thing about households in Perth Kinross in respect to fuel poverty. And it describes why we look at that, why is the Scottish Government important at that it's all households, not just our own housing stock. And it has a nice little graph that describes since 2015 a fall in the people in fuel poverty by 6%. But the question I have is, in that graph it's got three columns. One column's at 39%, the next column's at 22%, and then the most recent column's back up again to 32%. So my question sort of goes around why have we had this dip and then an increase in households with fuel poverty in Perth and Kinross?
Barbara.
If I could find the page. Yeah, it's okay. Yep, thank you. My trusty assistant has provided it for me. I would need to get a little bit more information to give you a proper answer for that, you know, sort of, so, you know, so if you don't mind, can I come back to you on that? Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think it was Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much, Convener, for that moment of doubt. I don't think you'll ever keep anyone happy in terms of how you present something, but for me, this report represents an admirable balance between dense reading for those that want it, links for those that want that, and infographics for those who perhaps want to skim through it more briefly. But there's one or pair of pages which I think are slightly misleading and which might be changed on a future report. And I'm referring to pages 48 and 49 of the report, 66 and 67 of our document pack. The first is cunningly called How We Spend Your Council Tax, and the second is cunningly called How Your Council Tax is Spent. And so they purport to show more or less the same things, but they're a bit different. And I think that actually the first one might be more accurately be referred to as a budget overview, as opposed to just how your council tax is spent. And the second one, how your council tax is spent, yes, that's what it is, but for me, rather confusingly, the 7 subdivisions there do not relate to the, I think it's 13 subdivisions on the other page, and I find that I think that's a bit confusing to me, particularly when they're on adjacent pages. So I think all the information there is good and great, but it's not that particular pair of pages is not the best presentation, I think. Thanks.
Okay, we'll certainly, you know, sort of look at that and take those comments on board. You know, sort of, and I think that based on the comments by Councillor Stewart, if we put a little bit more detail and links behind about what everything means as well, and we can pick that up.
Sorry, I was just having my maths corrected by the head of legal services here, so it saved me asking an embarrassing question.
It's good you're back in the room, Convener.
Councillor Dugan.
Thanks very much, Convener. Having clearly done something very wrong in a previous life, I'm now in my 8th year of being on a scrutiny committee in the council. So I've shared the journey that officers, arduous journey that officers have been on, whereby reports have got too much information and then they don't have enough information and then they go and have too much information. And so I'm very aware that officers, it's a thankless task and they'll never get it right. However, this is by far the slickest effort I've ever seen. And I think officers should get credit for really what is a very well presented and attractive and effective piece of work. I mean, just to reference Councillor Illingworth's point from earlier on in his the chart, the infographic on page 18 of the report with the 74 and the 76%, there's a little bit of narrative on the next 2 pages about the broader situation in education, and then there's the links, and if you click the link saying school attendance rates primary, it takes you directly, absolutely directly to this indicator shows a generally improving trend making good progress towards the overall aim of 85%. What more context do you need to understand those? So if all it takes is a couple of clicks to find it out, and that saves you wading through hundreds of pages, you can't have it both ways. You can't have a telephone directory of information, most of which is irrelevant to what you want, and then say, well, it's not got all the information that I need. I think this is an absolute step change in how we see information reported to us, and it's very much in the right direction. That having been said, Convener, I will just skip down to page 46, which indicates that 191 social rented 191 rented housing. Difficulty I'm having reading it. It doesn't read very well. So there's 191 socially rented houses built in the year, and 68 of these were council homes. that puts us, by my calculation, I'm ready to be assured or reassured, it's some way behind the strategic housing investment plan that was agreed by the last administration of 1,000 houses, 1,000 affordable houses built over the course of this administration. Can we get some information on where we are in terms of that adherence to the SHIP?
Yes, I think Barbara will answer that one.
Barbara will attempt to answer that question. My understanding is that we're on target. You know, sort of the target was 550 a year over a 5-year, each year for a 5-year period. So this is, you know, sort of in terms of in total, then we are above target for all new house builds.
Yeah, and that's fine. I've always been reluctant for the council to take credit for new house builds. Our responsibility is affordable housing, working with our partners in RSLs. So the figure that I'm really interested in is the multiplier of 191 in year and the effect that that has over a 5-year administration. So it will be some way short if that's, but they do wax and wane. So we might have over-provided last year, I don't know. Well, that wasn't the previous administration's target. We can maybe catch up on that later.
If I can come back to you just with detail on that, thank you. But to go back to, if I may go back to Councillor McEwen's question, you know, sort of, so in terms of full poverty, it's based on the Scottish House Condition Survey, which is a sample survey. And as such, all figures are provided in estimates, and it's subject to the sample variability about who they ask.
Okay, thank you. If there's no more questions or any comments on the report, I think we've had a few comments, we've mixed them up. I'll endorse Councillor Dugan and the majority of the people on the committee that we think this is a move forward in the provision of facts for us. And the fact, I still stick by the thing about the links, where you can get interested. If you're really interested in something, you can find out the information in depth. And if you just want an overview, you can just read the basic document. So I'd like to thank officers for what they've done with this. And I'll comments, Councillor McCall.
Sorry, it's just really a follow-up to my earlier question, in that the information, I presume, is available on the Council's website that we're linking through to, but there's no indication that any of it is in any sort of readable, accessible format other than regular text. So again, it's something we've raised before. It might give some consideration to make it available to all of our citizens. Thank you.
Can we note this report? Okay, we move on to item 6, which is Business Gateway. At the last committee meeting, the committee asked me to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Economy regarding the ring fencing of the funds for Business Gateway. I've had a response from Derek Mackay, and I'll not read the whole letter, but he is willing, if we go through, there's a review, if we go through COSLA, he's willing to look at this. So I'll speak to Murray and ask him if he can raise it on our behalf through the proper channels. I'll now ask Barbara to give us an update on the situation with Business Gateway and the funds that we're attempting to recover from Dundee City Council.
Thank you, Convener. The current situation is that we still have no written response to a further request to Dundee City Council to look at the reinstatement of the budget, you know, sort of from previous years. You know, sort of, however, our Chief Executive has been told that this is highly unlikely to happen.
Okay, I will open up to what the committee think of that response from the Chief Executive of Dundee City Council. I'll start with Councillor Dugan and then Councillor Ahern.
Thanks to officers for pursuing this unfortunate issue on behalf of elected members and the people of Perth and Kinross. I think that response is challenging for us to accept on Perth and Kinross Council. if for no other reason than it gives the impression that it's a unilateral decision on the part of Dundee City Council whether or not they reinstate the money. And I would like to ask officers in the event that we have failed as a council bilaterally to negotiate the return of those funds to business gateway enterprises in Perth and Kinross, where we go from there, because I personally am not minded to just acquiesce and say, oh, so we're not getting it back. Well, that's fine then. It's not fine, and we will continue to pursue this through whichever way we can. We have a responsibility on all councils, but particularly partner councils in Tayside, to work collaboratively and constructively between each other. But that has to be a two-way street, and it is not conducive, in my view, to parity of esteem or constructive working together to have been to take such a intransigent view and to not see Perth and Kinross's point of view in this matter. It's not a particularly nuanced point that we've made. That money should have been invested in business in Perth and Kinross, and it wasn't. And we'd like to have steps taken to make sure that we can invest it in businesses in Perth and Kinross. And I think we should very much make it clear that we will not be quietening down on this, either through councillors or acting on instructions of councillors, officers. This is not going to get, this is not going to go away.
Thank you. I'll take some views of others on the committee, and then we'll see if we can come to an agreement with a way moving forward. Councillor Hearn.
Thank you very much. You've written to Derek Mackay on our request, and I think you should write on our request to John Alexander, who's the head of Dundee City Council. Can I ask the head of legal what the legal basis is for them keeping it, and whether we have a legal basis to actually recover the money?
I think the difficulty is that it's not money that's come to us that we've put in, that we've put funded. This is a tendered agreement whereby Scottish Government money is channelled and the lead authority is Dundee City Council. And what Dundee City Council have done have taken corporate support costs effectively. So but there's none of that provided in the detail. So it's not, there's not money that we've put in that we're not getting back. And if you look at the performance of Business Gateway, there's nothing to suggest that Perth and Kinross haven't had a fair output from that. So there's not, we don't really have a locus in this, which is part of the difficulty and the challenge.
I thought at a previous meeting it was said that they could not act unilaterally. It had to be an agreement between the three councils. There's been no agreement, so what right do they have to act unilaterally? I've spoken to Councillor Hearn earlier and suggested that if the committee wished, I would write directly to the leader of the council and stress, if everybody's in agreement with me, how unfair this is and how it does not lead to working collaboratively. The fact that they can act unilaterally to remove monies that were intended to be destined for small businesses in Perth and Kinross. And if everybody gives me the back and we'll take that, I don't think we should accept it in any shape or form.
If there's no legal basis to get any monies back, what confidence have we got moving forward that they need to stick to the agreement?
Well, the difficulty that you have is that they're your lead authority at the moment, and they've made a decision which we've challenged in terms of the amount of money that we're looking at. It's about the money of challenging it back. Yes, we can challenge the principle of they've done it unilaterally, but we're not suing for a sum back because we've never had the sum. That's part of the complication. If it was a straightforward money should have come to us and we don't have it, there would be a very clear legal route. The problem is because of the way this is tendered and the fact that Dundee operates as the lead authority confuses the legal route for it, which is why we've tried to do it through negotiation and discussion. But you know, I'll take on board the views of the committee, and we'll go back and have another.
So there's nothing we can do to stop them continuing in the same frame of mind moving forward?
But Dundee surely are only the lead authority because we gave them the right to be the lead authority. If they're abusing that right, we will remove the right for them to be our lead authority.
It's part of the tendered process, so we would need to look at that in a bit more depth. I mean, obviously, when we had the discussions in the first instance, we were hopeful that the communication between the two chief executives would bear some fruit.
The problem,
we've obviously had no response from that.
The problem I see it as moving forward, we have a lot of collaborative projects moving ahead across the three councils, and we should be working collaboratively. But if this is the level of working together that we're experiencing on this one issue that we've raised, it's been brought up thanks to Councillor Stewart. We've pursued this now for months, and we're not even getting a written response. It doesn't bode well for the future relationship between working on these other projects. Councillor McCall.
Thank you. I just really want to endorse very strongly exactly what you've said. I think it's imperative. It goes towards a matter of trust, and you know, not just in this particular instance, but everywhere else. And if the governance between the various participatory councils in these joint working arrangements does effectively allow the lead council to act arbitrarily, then I think we need to have a look at all of the arrangements in place and make sure that they're fit for purpose, and that such arbitrary acts can't be continued at will in future.
Thank you. Councillor Parrott.
I think we need to be cautious in our terminology. Without a doubt, because of Dundee City Council's actions, there has been less money available for businesses across the Tayside region, not just in Perth and Kinross, because my understanding of the way Business Gateway works is that the money is not sub-allocated to the areas that Business Gateway and Tayside covers. So it's not necessarily that the money would have come to Perth and Kinross. But I would ask the question of, if Dundee City Council chose to take this money to cover costs, you know, presumably they can only do that if there's something in the working mechanisms that allow that, and we've had no indication of that. And I'd ask for reassurance from Barbara Renton that, if you like, the issue that we're dealing with now is restricted to monies already dealt with or spent. Dundee City Council have agreed to rectify their actions in sense of monies going forwards. Thank you.
Yeah.
But certainly I endorse the comments of others that there is a substantial matter of trust here. The amount of money may be fairly small overall, particularly in the context of a legal action, but it's a bigger matter of trust that impacts on other areas where we might be asked to cooperate or have the opportunity to cooperate in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. So I would like, at the end of this discussion, after hearing from Councillor Purvis and Councillor Stewart, I would be looking for if everybody in the committee can endorse the position we're taking, and we take it as a united committee. But I'll give way to Councillor Purvis.
No, I don't have any issue with the suggestion of writing to the leader of Dundee City Council in relation to the money from previous years that we would like to see put to its proper use. Just to follow up on some of the comments that were made by the Head of Legal and Governance and in response to some of the questions about there being no legal basis for recovering the money. Obviously, you were talking about that it's part of the tendering process that this money is allocated and goes to Dundee as a lead authority. Is there any, for other, it's not as if it's a joint committee or something that we've set up, but is there any form of, whether it's a memorandum of understanding or something between the three constituent authorities in relation to how the tender process works, and could that be amended if necessary to?
Yeah, and we could look at that, but they're not supposed to take an arbitrary decision, and that's we've accepted that they've done that and it's not been appropriate, which is why it's been challenged by the Chief Executive and quite rightly raised by the committee.
Sorry, is there a memorandum of understanding or some similar document?
There's a basic tender memo.
And in that it says that the Dundee City Council can't...
There is an assumption that you don't act arbitrarily, that you act with...
Explicit in this document.
The difficulty that you've got then is where do you go with any form of... I know you're looking to the head of legal to say, well, what do you do legally? But, one of the difficulties that you have is what are you actually challenging? What would that legal remedy look like? And that's quite difficult to ascertain.
But then I suppose the question is, what's the point in having a document like that then, if it doesn't have any teeth, or there's no recourse?
One of the difficulties that you have with these things is they're all built on this idea of consensus and collaboration and trust, and that they're not... It's not like a commercial contract where you would have... where there would be some teeth. And the reality is we do have an awful lot of agreements and understanding which actually when you get into a position whereby they're being challenged, you find out that they are quite toothless. And as I say, because this is a fundamental thing that's been built on trust, the hope was that the discussions that were being held by the Chief Executive would have borne some fruit. I'm absolutely happy to go and rack my brains again to see if there's something else that would
I suppose
add a little bit more weight to that.
Yeah, just a couple of further points. One, is there any way of strengthening whatever document that there is between the three constituent authorities, particularly in relation to the financial part, so that although, yes, we have had a guarantee, we wouldn't have expected it to happen in the past, so I think we can all understand why there is a hesitancy to accept that and take it at face value. The next point is more just a comment going forward. When we started this discussion, it was a more wide, number of committees previously. It was a more wider discussion about Business Gateway and how it operated and whether it was the best model using the current contract and whether we should be looking at continuing to have the lead authority model or doing it just on a Perth and Kinross basis. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of that, and I would still be very keen that at a future committee, a future scrutiny committee, officers bring us back essentially more information and perhaps a range of options. I know there is still obviously a period of the current contract that is outstanding, but given the current situation, I think it's prudent for us to think about the next steps. So if we've almost got a situation in place where we're trying to ensure that there's no money being taken out inappropriately in future years until such a point as we change the arrangement, but we can't forget where this discussion started. The point raised by Councillor Stewart was one point within a wider discussion, and it's absolutely appropriate that we're following it up. But it is only one part of what we were trying to do in terms of ensuring that the business support services that are available, and particularly in a distinctly rural area like Perth and Kinross, that we focused on, are we delivering those in the best possible way? So if we could get a commitment from you, Convener, that at some point in the future we would get that information coming back to this committee, but happy to endorse your suggestion about writing to the Leader of Dundee City Council.
Thank you, and you're correct, because it was quite a few committees before ago that we were going to have a chat about Business Gateway and then decide if we were wanting to bring people from Business Gateway in. We maybe have lost sight of that because of Councillor Stewart's revelation. And I think that at the moment, I think we'll continue to pursue that, but I'll give you the commitment that we will bring back and look at the whole Business Gateway situation at a future committee.
Thank you, Convener. So just to echo the point that Councillor Purvis was making, that it would be good to get a proper written update. So there is still money which is nominally this council's being spent on the Business Gateway contract, although it never passes through our bank account. It passes through through the COSLA arrangements to Dundee City Council. And so as a scrutiny committee, we have or whether it was an audit committee, we have a function in monitoring the performance of the spending of that money and the effect that it has, positive or to what degree positive in supporting businesses within Perth and Kinross. I have previously asked, I don't know whether the director of, the executive director or anybody else has an exact figure. There's an, in terms of sort of returning to the issue of the top slicing, let's generously call it that, has an exact figure been established? Do we know yet? I think at the last committee, your deputy director gave the approximate figure that we had talked about before, but I had asked for an exact one.
Sorry, Councillor Stewart, for clarity, are you asking, you know, sort of in terms of a pro rata for Perth and Kinross?
Well, or what the
overall
total was across across the whole of the Business Gateway contract, and therefore roughly how it might be divided up in terms of a Perth and Kinross figure.
I'd quite like to reiterate the point that Councillor Parrott was saying, that, you know, sort of this is a regional model, and that the money isn't, you know, sort of dedicated particularly to Dundee, to Angus, and to Perth and Kinross. And, you know, the figures, you know, sort of that we have that show that for 17-18, which is the most up-to-date figures, and we're expecting Business Gateway to report back on the 18-19 figures soon, that of the money that was available, then, you know, sort of 41% of the business startups were Perth and Kinross business startups, as opposed to 33 in Dundee and 33, or 26 rather, there's my maths, you know, sort of within Angus. So, you know, proportionately we receive probably, you know, sort of more funding, you know, sort of, or our, you know, sort of business get more support, you know, sort of from Business Gateway than necessarily others, the two other partners within this. The amount that was reduced was £200,000 out of what was then a £1.2 million budget. That's added to by European Regional Development Fund money of another £200,000 or thereabouts. So the budget, you know, sort of remains, you know, sort of at over £1 million. What then happened, so the budget was reduced. What then happened was that the contract was retendered in 2017, and the tender process at that point seems to have, you know, sort of changed, you know, sort of renegotiated the targets. So that the targets for Business Gateway in terms of new business startup from the 17-18 figures talk about a target of 720, and they actually, you know, sort of delivered services to 779. Their target for startup workshops was 110. They actually delivered 137. So I think that we need to be careful about, you know, there is the money element, you know, sort of, and the target element, and, you know, sort of Business Gateway itself. And I'm not justifying any position or any, you know, sort of anything, but, you know, the presentation that I believe was given to Scrutiny Committee, you know, sort of a number of months ago by David, had that information in it. You know, sort of, so I think that what we need to do is be clear about, are we still delivering very good outcomes for businesses within the area, as well as, you know, sort of an issue about reimbursement or, you know, sort of, or whatever. But the contract and the tender was amended to reflect the budget.
I'm afraid can I pick up on it first? Thank you. To me, that's a side issue of the performance. The issue that we're dealing with just now is what the total sum that went to the from the Scottish Government to Dundee City Council to be distributed across the three authorities for the small businesses, etc., and business improvement. If you could just give us the total that was meant to be spent on it, and what Dundee City Council's actually forwarding on to Business Gateway.
My understanding, you know, sort of, and I will get this completely clarified for you, is that the budget was reduced by 200,000
per year.
Yes.
So that was in 2016, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, and 19, 20. So my maths will be 800,000. Right. Thank you. Thanks, Barbara.
It was just to agree with.
Come back.
Just to agree with what you were saying about their separate issues. I think, you know, we still need to have that wider discussion about Business Gateway and whether that's the best delivery model. No one's suggesting that we're getting bad services. You know, we're still getting a good service in terms of supporting local businesses. It was whether or not a different model might be more appropriate. But I think that regardless, it would be a reasonable assumption to make that even if they're meeting their targets or indeed exceeding their targets, a further £200,000 is presumably would help even more businesses. And that's the point on this issue. It's separate. It's not to say that they aren't meeting their targets, because clearly they are, but the additional money would help.
I think, sorry, you know, sort of, I think we need to, you know, sort of, and I think it would then, to have this, you know, sort of further conversation here with the experts in the room in terms of, you know, sort of David Littlejohn and some of his team, you know, sort of, but I think that we also need to be clear that sometimes, you know, sort of, because I've got the trend information in terms of, you know, sort of the Perth and Kinross businesses that have been supported through Business Gateway going back about 5 years, and it goes up and down. You know, sort of, and a lot of that will just depend on whether businesses are ready to get support, or, you know, sort of, it can link to the very low unemployment rate in Perth and Kinross. So I think we do need some of the, you know, sort of the metrics behind some of that as well. Councillor Purvis.
Very, very briefly, Camino, could I just ask an additional point? Obviously, we've had the commitment, which, you know, we're slightly apprehensive about, that the extra 200,000 will be put back in. Does that require a retender, or does it just the 200,000? Because obviously it was retendered on the basis of the new budget, I think you said earlier on. Perhaps, I'm not sure whether the 200,000 from the European Regional Development Funding was included in that or not. But if we're adding 200,000 on following a tender process, how does that work? Do we retender it? Do we just add extra money in? What's the process for that?
Unfortunately, I don't have that level of detail, but we can come back to you.
And to be fair, we've had no written response from Dundee City Council, so we don't know what's proposed. The only proposal they've come back is they will reinstate it in next year's budget, but they won't be putting any money back in of the 800,000 they've taken out. And it's not just the Perth and Kinross element that this is, I find, difficulty. It's business across the three authorities that are losing out. Councillor Barnack.
I'd just like to say that I support yourself and Vice Convener Parrott. The issue here is the response from Dundee is not good enough. I think there is now a lack of trust because of their action. I thought you'd written to Mackay about whether we could have an independent business gateway. Was it something else? Ring fencing, that's right. Well, my feeling is that unless we can have a restoration of trust in the lead authority, then my personal view as a council is that we should, if possible, pursue our own business gateway agenda, because that way we won't have this problem.
Councillor, I've forgotten which order it was. Councillor Ahern, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just if you're writing this letter, if we can get clarification from the leader of Dundee Council how that 800,000 was spent, whether it was actually spent to do with businesses.
We can ask.
Otherwise, they've received money from the Scottish Government that hasn't been used in the
But
purpose
it's not
it was
ring
intended
fenced,
for.
I don't think. I think that's the problem. Yeah. But we'll ask officers to look into that as well. Councillor Dugan.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, Convener. Dundee's internal budget is Dundee's business.
Yeah.
Our concern is limited to the element which we think rightfully belonged to Business Gateway Services in Perth and Kinross. I think we're in danger of overreaching. However, I disagree slightly that it's hard to demonstrate at the very least an opportunity cost, if not a financial cost, to business development in Perth and Kinross, because I think, as Councillor Purvis alluded to, you know, if we put this amount of money in and we got that amount of service out, then presumably if we put the same, even allowing for the law of diminishing returns, if we put more money in, we'd have got more of that service out. So there is an opportunity cost, manifestly, against Perth and Kinross as a result of this decision. But almost far more importantly, because taking the Director's point about the broader health of the economy in Perth and Kinross, And I think the performance of Business Gateway in Perth and Kinross, which we got the report on, I think it was very impressive from memory in terms of the value that we get from that. It's a very important principle, which is far more than any of that, really, actually. There's a reason that the document which the head of legal referred to is, flimsy, and that's because in actual fact it's not really based on that document at all. It's based on trust, and that trust is under severe strain at the moment. And it's maybe an opportunity at this stage to, while continuing efforts to have the money made available again, we would possibly, as a matter of urgency, want to look at all the elements of council business for which Dundee Council, City Council are the lead authority on, and enter into a dialogue calmly and in a business-like fashion about whether or not, if that was appropriate in the past, whether it remains appropriate in the future, and if there is a requirement for substantial top slicing in order to fund administrative cost of delivering that lead authority role, maybe we should be sharing it out more equally across the three partners in Tayside, rather than relying on our colleagues in Dundee to deliver it all the time. And that was something that I would be very happy to support, relieving them of that burden if it is so detailed. But I think whilst I'm exercised by this as well, we as a council, all of us, including officers, should not lose sight of the fact that we'll deliver very much more in Tayside for the people that live here by working collaboratively and constructively with each other than we will by going off in our own directions. So it's important we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in this particular scenario. I think this is unfortunate. I think we can fix it, and I think if we send that message quite clearly to our colleagues in Dundee City Council, then we'll get a resolution that we can all sign up to. How long that takes is another matter, but I think we'll get there. But we mustn't lose sight of what's value. There's a lot more at stake than just this money, and we shouldn't be reckless.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart to finish off.
Thanks. It was just to say that very specifically, I don't know whether this has been obviated subsequently by any re-tendering process, but there is a memorandum of understanding. It says, should there be any unanticipated under variations to the memorandum or services, should there be any unanticipated major systems weaknesses, significant control failures or other failure which makes it impossible to meet all the objectives within the specification, this will be brought to the attention of the Joint Committee at the earliest opportunity. There is meant to be a joint committee. There is, because I've been at one of them, I think, an informal conveners meeting which doesn't have a formally appointed representative of this council at it. Disputes. There is, of course, a dispute resolution clause. Any dispute between the member authorities arising in connection with the memorandum which can't be resolved by discussion between the member authorities in dispute shall be determined by an arbiter. But very critically, financial implications. Dundee City Council as lead authority shall receive, hold and distribute monies from the Scottish Government in terms of the letter. Dundee City Council as lead authority shall be responsible for making any payments due to the contractor in terms of the contract. Dundee City Council as lead authority accept and undertake that Dundee City Council will utilise the full sums paid and to be paid for the delivery of the business gateway services under the contractual arrangements which they are taking on in place of the local enterprise companies, and Dundee City Council shall not seek to make any cuts, reductions, downsizing or efficiencies in respect of the sums committed to the provision of the business gateway service in either or both cases unless with the written agreement of all the participating authorities. It is absolutely crystal clear. They had no right to do this. They have been, it was flagged up to them. They took a couple of years ago when our former interim head of economic development was raising the issue with them. They ignored him for a period of, I think it was about 5 months to reply to a relatively straightforward email. They have not dealt with this with any alacrity or sense of the criticality or the importance of the simple mistrust that this engenders between authorities, which should be able to, as neighbouring authorities, be able to collaborate on things like, we're now looking at the Tay Cities deal and the Tay Cities Joint Committee, where we have acceded to Dundee City Council being once again the lead authority. And that's a budget, instead of 1 million, that's a budget of hundreds of millions of pounds. These matters are important. If we can't get them right on the simple level, and the important point critically is that that £800,000 should have been spent helping small businesses. If there are more businesses or less businesses from one year to the next in Perth and Kinross getting set up and getting the help from Business Gateway, then it is because we have a full employment level. But what we need to do is make sure that we are maximising. We also have below the national average wage for residents in Perth and Kinross. We need to be maximising the economic development opportunities in Perth and Kinross. We've seen the enormously swift uptake of the Rural Micro Enterprise Fund at the end of the last financial year and start of this financial year. £238,000 in grants to 38 rural businesses going out, within a matter of weeks. Setting up of some of the other rural economic development priorities. This is money which could be supporting businesses not only in Dundee and Angus, or not only in Perth and Kinross, but also in Angus and Dundee, and with no consultation and with and then shutting the door on us. Dundee City Council have made these changes unilaterally, and it's simply not acceptable. I would certainly support you writing to the leader of Dundee City Council to alert him to both this committee and Perth and Kinross Council's concerns. But frankly, if you don't get joy in terms of the restoration of those monies to Business Gateway, because we're not going to get them back as a council, but Business Gateway should be benefiting from them, or some other mechanism for delivering economic development. If you don't get any joy, I suggest you report it to Dundee City Council auditors, because they have arguably mishandled finances which were provided to them for a particular purpose without making the appropriate amendments to or seeking to make the appropriate amendments to the contracts under which it was handed to them.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed that we will take all possible measures to have this money put back into Business Gateway's coffers, and I think the committee is unanimous on that, and I will endeavour to keep everybody updated as to how it progresses. So thanks for everybody agreeing with that, and thanks for your attendance today.